for Monday, February 25th, 2019. Could we all please rise for the Pledge of Allegiance? Thank you. Phyllis, can we have the roll call, please?
Mayor Clint Paulson.
Here.
Mayor Pro Tem Mark Lasis.
Here.
Trustee Sandy Hammerling. Here. Ken Lish.
Here.
Kevin Ryan. Here. Neil Shaw.
Here.
Laura Skwazinski. Here. Town Manager Matt Badley. Here. Town Attorney Kendra Carberry. Here. Town Clerk Phyllis Harden. Here.
Thank you. Next is the approval of the agenda. Do we have any items on the agenda that board members would like to pull off the consent agenda or other changes to the agenda?
I'd like to pull item 3E off the consent agenda.
Okay, 3E. Any additional changes?
I'd like to propose.
I'm sorry. There's someone in the audience saying the mics aren't working. Do you know they're not on?
Is this any better?
No, they don't seem to be working.
Hello?
They are? Okay. All right.
Okay.
Sorry.
Okay.
Thank you.
I'd like to propose moving item 3C to be discussed in conjunction with item 4. So the amended ordinance for the wireless communication facilities be discussed in conjunction with the master license agreement with Verizon. All right.
Okay, it looks like Martin pushed the button back there. So, okay, thanks.
You got it.
Okay, got it.
Okay.
Thank you. All right.
Got it.
Kendra, any issues with moving?
No, you'll just pull
3C
3C and we will consider it then with whatever the, hold on. 4, thank
4.
you.
Okay. Any additional changes? I'll entertain a motion to approve the agenda. Motion by Trustee Ryan, second by Trustee Lish. All those in favor? All right, passes unanimous. All right, next is reports, questions, issues. Who'd like to start? Kevin?
Nothing major report. We have a new work group in town. We are collaborating with the Rocky Mountain Fire District, not unlike the way we have a joint issues committee with the town of Louisville. And so we kicked off that process today. Happy to have one of their board members, and Chief Mike is joined by Ken as well. So we kicked that off today, and I think this year you'll see a lot of increased collaboration between the town and Rocky Mountain Fire. So excited to kick that off, and nothing else to report.
Okay, thanks. We'll go this way, Laura.
So I attended a meeting of the Historical Commission last week, as well as a meeting of the Superior Youth Leadership Council. Introduced myself to the group there. On a public note, I attended a ribbon cutting at the sports stable for a new testing education business, so I would encourage everyone to check that out. And finally, as always, I will be publishing on my blog a list of all the emails that have been sent to our town board in the last 2 weeks, so that if anyone would like to submit a request to see those in detail, you may do so.
Thanks, Ken.
Last week I attended the ACES meeting. The group is looking forward to presenting their Superior Sustainability Scorecard to the board and receiving feedback. Tentatively, the group is planning to do that at the 4/22 joint dinner, so looking forward to that. With Trustee Ryan, attended the Rocky Mountain Fire work group today. I too am looking forward to the outcome of that. I think we've got a lot of promising outcomes of that coming forward. And then also, Sandy, I noticed there's a OSAC recommendation. I don't know if you wanted to touch on that, but it looked like they're looking for board feedback. That's all.
All right, thanks. Mark?
Good evening, everyone. This coming Wednesday through Friday, I'm going to be traveling to Washington, D.C. to meet with our congressional and Senate delegation on behalf of the mayor, who was unavailable able to travel there. It's Commuting Solutions annual mayor's trip. We'll be meeting with both Senator Bennett and Gardner, and then all of the congressional delegations to discuss transportation issues along the US 36 corridor and the general region. So I'm looking forward to that. It's a unique opportunity. We're going to meet with Congressman Neguse on Wednesday night and get a tour of the Capitol before dinner, so it's going to be great. So I will have, I'm sure, a lot to report at the next board meeting after I get back from DC. The other thing I just wanted to touch on was an update on the CenturyLink property and oil and gas negotiations. The town has sent a letter that has already been shared with OSAC, correct? Will be available. We're going to be posting it on the website. Is that the plan?
I have not done that yet.
Okay.
Yes.
Well, we sent a letter dated February 8th, 2019 to CenturyLink, expressing the town's interest in connection with preservation groups in acquiring the 182-acre CenturyLink property. So that remains to be seen, but the discussions will be ongoing, and I'm hopeful that they will bear fruit. And that's all I have. Thanks.
Thanks, Neil.
Let me start with the Louisville Superior Joint Issues meeting. We had it last week. Trustee Hammerly and I met with a couple of the board members or city council members, as well as their city manager and assistant manager. They gave us a major deep dive on their draft transportation plan. I think we have a link to it on their website or our website. It's a fantastic piece of work. I recommend anybody who wants to dive through it. It's really helpful to do that. We got an update from the Louisville Library Director, and she shared her plans for the summer program, and it includes a couple of programs here in Superior. I know that in the past, it's been a bit of concern that we do pay into the library about 18 to 19%, but we have yet to see any programming specific to Superior. So July 16th and August 16th, we'll have some programs here that will be in Community Park. Louisville also shared their third-party analysis on municipal broadband, and that too, I recommend anyone who wants to read through it, do it. The finding is actually very interesting in terms of how expensive and where Louisville is coming out on that. The key thing that Louisville is going to actually be pursuing is a middle mile, and their 2019 budget includes further analysis on that. Lafayette has expressed interest in partnering. Trustee Hammerly and myself suggest that Superior may like to participate as well. This week we also had the ProStack, or actually last week we had the ProStack meeting. I'm not going to repeat what's already in the town weekly email that came out, but it is worth noting that the development of the Riverbend Park may prove to be difficult because of the drainage pond and the necessary buffers around it. So it's going to be a work in progress for ProStack, but it does look to be a little bit of a challenging area. I also want to add that the amenity prioritization process for ProStack is underway, and the update of that is going to reemphasize the need to update the PROST master plan. The last update to that plan was 2005, and many, many things have changed. I personally think that we absolutely need to pursue a partial or even a comprehensive update of that plan to align ourselves to what open spaces we have and what our actual ADA compliance prioritization should be. That's it.
Thanks, Neil. Sandy?
Thank you. First of all, I want to apologize to my colleagues on the board and the community for my absence from the last meeting. I unfortunately have chronic back issues, and that was one of the nights that it was pretty bad. So it might have been a lot of fun if I'd been here because the muscle relaxers were very effective. But I do want to apologize to everyone that I was unable to attend. I attended the OSAC meeting on February 13th. I would like to call to the attention of the trustees and the community that the ecological study of potential development on the Hodgson-Harris Reservoir has been published and is now on the town website. So I encourage folks to take a look at that. The OSAC also made a specific request of the town and asked for the board's support of the following. OSAC recommends town staff to reach out to Susan Spalding of Boulder County hydrology staff and/or other Boulder County staff regarding the Hodgson-Harris Reservoir water level management and the report, as noted in the report. Basically what happens is in the spring when the waterfowl actually come in and start nesting, it also happens to be the same time of year when the farmers start needing the water to come down through the reservoir, and it's having a negative impact on the ability of waterfowl to be there. And so the OSAC basically asked for your support to encourage staff to have that conversation with Boulder County. It may be there's nothing we can do, but we really would like to be proactive with them to protect the waterfowl species that are there. So do I have a general consensus with from you guys that you're supportive of that? And then I'm sure Matt can just talk with his staff and have them move forward. Is everybody good with that? Yeah. Okay, Matt. And I know that staff was anxious to go ahead and do that, but they just want to make sure you were supportive. As Neil said, I attended the joint issues meeting with representatives of the town of Louisville. One of the things that we also mentioned during that meeting was that we'd like to have an outreach meeting where representatives of the library would come over and meet with Superior residents about what kind of services they would like to see happen in the town of Superior. This is not talking about building facilities, but what kind of programming might we be interested in having. So I think sometime within the next 6 to 8 months, we'll probably have a meeting over here where residents can come in and just talk to the library staff about things we might be able to do here in the community. And then the last thing, I attended the Denver Regional Council of Governments meeting on February 20th. The body continues to work with Metro mayors on the topic of transportation funding in our metro area. And one of the topics that has been brought forth by Metro mayors is that we really look at whether there might be a way to have a regional transportation authority that would help us come up with some ways to fund some of the transportation problems we have here in the community. It's just a talking point at this point, but it's great that Metro mayors and Dr. Cog are trying to work together on a problem that is continuing to be an issue here. It was a major hurt for the community when Proposition 110 did not pass. And it's affecting our ability to fund roads in the community. So we'll continue to have discussions on that. And then at our April meeting, we will actually be reviewing the regional transportation applications, and hopefully we'll have good news on our application here in Superior, and hopefully we'll hear that we'll get some funding in April. And that would be it.
Okay, thanks, Sandy. On the 21st, I covered the Superior Youth Leadership Council meeting for Mark, who was out of town. And Laura dropped by, as you mentioned, to introduce herself. And Kevin Colon, who's the staff liaison to the council, suggested that other trustees, both new and existing, drop by and visit just for 5 or so minutes with the youth on the council, just to introduce yourselves, tell them a little bit about yourself. Thought that format might work a little bit better than the dinners that we do with the different committees. So I thought that was a good idea and good suggestion. So just as your schedules allow, connect directly with Kevin Colon and just kind of fill yourselves into one of the slots at one of their upcoming meetings. And it's a great group. They're doing a lot of great things. Most of the discussion was about the Parents' Night Out event that they're going to host on March 15th, 6:30 to 9 p.m. at El Dorado School. And it's a free event for the community to drop off kids for a night of childcare, for a date night, and the kids on the Youth Leadership Council will entertain them with fun games and awards and food, and it's a great event for them to organize and for participants. And last year they had about 75 kids that participated in this, so very well attended, and hoping to have a good attendance this year. So upcoming events on March 9th it's a Saturday, 10 a.m. to 11:30 a.m. town hall event here with our state senator Tammy Story and state representative Matt Gray. They're going to just have an open house town hall style event for people in the community to come visit with them. And reminder that we'll only have one board meeting in March. We take the second meeting off if it falls in the same week as spring break, which it does this year. So we're taking that meeting off. So only one meeting in March on March 11th. And of course, the Parents' Night Out on March 15th. So that is it for my announcements. Matt?
Thanks, Mayor. I have nothing to report.
Okay, Kendra?
Nothing for me, thanks.
All right, and Phyllis?
No, I don't have anything.
All right, thank you. All right, we're up to public comment, and this is an opportunity for public comment on consent agenda or non-agenda items. If you'd like to make public comment, just give a little wave and I'll signal you to come up. So I'll have you first and you're second, sir, and third.
Sorry, this is my first civic engagement other than voting, so if there's a protocol I'm missing, just let me know. My name is Jeff Posner. I live in Calmonte on Castellan Circle. My question/comment relates to snow removal on the sidewalks along the east side of Calmonte Avenue. The west side is still under development. 2 snowstorms ago, it wasn't cleared. I submitted a fix-it ticket and was informed by the town that it was HOA responsibility. This last snowstorm, I reached out to the HOA management company and was told by a single board member that supposedly negotiations are in place and the town has, quote, agreed to take over snow removal along Calmonte Avenue on the sidewalk. Which is the sidewalk I use to walk my dog. And due to the confusion and the fact that March and April are the first and third snowiest months, I'm hoping to get clarification either tonight or sometime this week to make sure that I know at the next snowstorm whether the town will clear the sidewalks on Calmonte Avenue or the HOA will take responsibility, as the current ordinance appears to say they should. Thank you.
Okay, thanks for the comment. Matt, do you have anything to add, or maybe get back to us on that?
Yeah, I'll follow up on it.
Okay. All right, thank you. And I did receive your email, and we'll be sure to follow up. So thanks for your comments. Yes, sir.
Mr. Mayor, trustees, my name is Randy Stafford, and I am a resident of Jefferson County. I come before you tonight to commend the town of Superior and its Board of Trustees for taking responsible positions on matters related to Rocky Flats in recent history. As you know, Superior filed a lawsuit years ago to attempt to slow the progress of the Jefferson Parkway. More recently, Superior declined to join 6 other local governments that partnered to apply for a federal lands access program grant to build crossings of the Rocky Mountain Greenway Trail into the Rocky Flats National Wildlife Refuge. And most recently, Superior filed a lawsuit against the United States Fish and Wildlife Service for not properly following the provisions of the National Environmental Protection Act before opening the Rocky Flats National Wildlife Refuge. These actions on Superior's part are exemplary demonstrations of responsible positions on Rocky Flats matters by local governments. Would that more of the local governments in the region be so conscientious. Mr. Mayor, trustees, the threats from Rocky Flats are not going away. Visitors to the refuge could be tracking contaminants into public places and businesses in Superior every day. Acts of God like the flood of 2013 could redistribute contamination in ways that haven't even been measured since. And heaven forbid a wildfire occur on the refuge, as past test burns have measurably increased radioactivity miles away from the site where the smoke blows. Finally, construction of the Jefferson Parkway could resuspend plutonium oxide dust into the air for construction workers and downwind residents to breathe. These matters are imminent threats to public health, and the town of Superior seems the only local government with the courage to take action against these developments. Your leadership by example and the precedent you have set is highly commendable. I do hope that other local governments will finally follow in your footsteps. If I could ask one thing, it would be that Superior's attorney file an amicus brief in support of the current petition before the court to unseal the records of Colorado Special Grand Jury 89-2 filed by attorney Pat Mellon, so that the public can finally know the full extent of the contamination at the site. Thank you again, and keep up the good work.
Thank you. Yes, sir.
Yeah, my name is Praful Shah. I live in 3246 Opal Lane, and I'm here to talk about the outdoor pickleball courts for Superior. I think this has been talked about for the last 3 years now. And in 2017, I think the Prospect Committee did a lot of work, and they selected 3 different places to put the pickleball courts outdoors. and it was approved. Finally, they picked up the dog park as the correct site for it. It was fully funded in that year, but somehow when it came to the last minute, the board kind of canceled the whole project. That's what I've been told. And I'm here back again to talk about it and where do we stand now. And the least we can do this year to quickly we can do actually is there are 2 tennis courts near the swimming pools. We can convert them so that they can play pickleball as well as tennis at the same, on the same court. And you can, tennis courts are not used, pickleball can be used, or you can make it on a first come, first served basis. And those are the easiest thing to do. Rather than building a new one, if we do not have any funding for it, then we can do that. But if you can get complete funding, I would suggest we do pickleball court just for themselves. We can go back to the dog park or anywhere else that Prospect committee can make it up. But we do need it. It's a very popular game. It's been used everywhere in the country. The most popular sport in today. Thank you.
Okay. Thank you for the comments, and Trustee Ryan's going to respond with
Mr. Shaw, thank you. Thanks for your passion about pickleball. I have good news. We have painted temporary lines on the basketball, not temporary lines. We have painted pickleball lines on the basketball court at Wildflower Park, not far from your house. We have.
You're talking about the Wildflower Park?
Yes.
Yeah, those are not the right lines. A couple of lines are missing. You cannot play there. Plus, the other fact actually is the.
Do you mind going?
So, sorry. So, as a best practice, we probably should engage in a conversation, but we have a commitment from the town to paint temporary lines, which we've done. We have a couple of nets that aren't awesome nets, but they're good enough quality. They're currently stored in a secure location and soon will be stored, if you notice that orange locker by the basketball courts. So we're going to store the nets there in the spring and look for a couple members of the community. Perhaps you'd like to volunteer to help us make sure in the evening that those nets are resecured into the locked place.
Yeah, let me bring it up. The lines are drawn. There are 2 or 3 lines missing, but that's not a big problem. The pickleball actually cannot be played on a concrete floor. It needs a turf. Plus, it also needs a fence. Otherwise, the ball is going to go all over the entire flower park. We don't want to be running about the ball all day long.
We understand it's a small step to bring pickleball, but we thought this would be a good low-cost opportunity to introduce pickleball to the community because a lot of people are not familiar with it. So I'd ask just to be patient, and also ProStack, the Parks and Recreation Committee, would be an excellent place for you also to reinforce the desire to have pickleball. But for now, we have a temporary solution. I know it's not optimal, but
no, it's not optimal. It's not even, it's not even playable. You cannot play pickleball on turf concrete floor.
Okay.
So it just cannot be done. So I think that needs to be understood that it's not being used. Nobody has used it. It's been there. I live right behind Flower Park, and it's never been used for pickleball at all. Okay. It's been almost 4 months since the lines were drawn, and then half the people don't even know it, and nobody has even tried to play it because you cannot play it. Okay. So it's a waste of money, whatever we did so far.
Okay.
So.
Okay. Thank you.
Okay. Thank you. All right. Additional public comment?
Good evening, board. Good to see you guys. My name is Brad Walker. I live in the town of Superior. I live approximately 1.5 miles from the airport. I'm a private pilot. I fly general aviation aircraft from Rocky Mountain Metro Airport. Previously, I've made comments to the board about enlisting the help of a consulting firm to help guide improvements stakeholders could voluntarily adopt. I've met with the airport director, the town Superior manager, and staff, various flight schools at Rocky Mountain Metro. It's my opinion everyone wants to make an improvement that reduces airplane sound. I won't rehash my comments as you probably have seen them. They're also part of the public record. But I would say the contract with ABC x2 Consultants is a good positive first step. I also want to make some other comments. I looked over the contract and there's something that immediately jumped out to me. In the phase 2 portion of the contract, the following wording was stipulated: shall improve working in cooperation with airport stakeholders to implement realistic noise abatement solutions with initial prioritization focusing on flight schools operating out of the airport. Any changes to the airport and/or operating rules agreements at Rocky Mountain Metro that focus exclusively on flight schools could possibly be viewed as discriminatory. When an airport takes grants, of which Rocky Mountain Metro has taken many, they agreed to abide by grant assurance number 22, economic non-discrimination. This requires the sponsor to make its aeronautical facilities available to the public and the tenants on terms that are reasonable and without unjust discrimination. Focusing exclusively on flight schools would be unjust discrimination and a clear violation. Any changes to the airport operations in the air would require FAA agreement, and I'm sure they would not be in agreement to singling out the flight schools, or as any in-flight operations must be applied equally to all. Recently, I've started hearing about how the airport is in violation of a navigation easement. The premise is based upon the fact that Rocky Mountain Metro is no longer in compliance with its airport master plan from 1985. While it is true I signed a navigation agreement that refers to the plan from 1995, just like others, these airport master plans do not remain static. They are updated every 5 to 10 years as needed. The airport is operating within the parameters as defined by the current airport master plan. In summary, as I've previously mentioned, I'm sure AOPA would vigorously defend the pilot community if it found discriminatory action against general aviation. I've also spoken with NBAA, and they've raised this issue with David Ulane, who is the aeronautics director at the Colorado Department of Transportation. I hope that we can find a way for the general aviation community to voluntarily make changes, but to focus on the flight schools as a single point of airplane noise is not going to get the results the citizens and the Town of Superior Board desires. And obviously, if I have any questions, I'm happy to answer them.
Thank you for the comments.
Yes, sir.
Appreciate it. Any additional public comment? Yes.
Good evening. I'm Diane Marcella. I'm a resident of Rock Creek South. I did want to speak tonight, sorry, haven't done this before, just in support of the agreement with the airport consultants. I do understand there was concern up front about costs, and whenever you go down the path with consultants, it can get expensive quickly. The parameters that were set up with, $200 to $350 an hour, it is really a lot of hours. And I understand we're splitting the cost with Louisville, but for $15,000, I just wanted to say if the town could keep an open mind, if progress is being made with changes that would impact our community here for our safety, for our quality of life, for our property values, it could take, time and hours to do the modeling, to look at the patterns of traffic. If you want to look at what's going on the north end of the runways versus the south end, one county versus the other, engaging with the FAA, the air traffic control, which is very important, those two key stakeholders, the airport, et cetera. So I just wanted to say, I understand there's a $30,000 limit what's being proposed, but if there is progress being made and the town feels that that is something to continue to pursue, that there's an open mind, for any other further funding. And I would like to say that we can look at a lot of different things. The flight schools is something in particular that is a big concern to those of us south of Colton Road. The touch and goes that are going over us continuously. We have people that are from 16 to 25-year-old learning to fly in those planes. We have planes that are from 1970s and 1980s flying over our houses. El Dorado has 1,000 students from pre-K to 8th grade, that we have those planes that are flying low and slow that poses certain dangers. There was just another crash in Winter Haven, Florida over the weekend. Training pilot with a student crashed into a house soon after takeoff. Pilot died. So I just think we should be looking at a lot of things. There's other factors besides the flight schools, just the general aviation traffic that was being distributed between one side of the runways and the other. So it isn't just the flight schools. But I think if you look at that all, that's not being discriminatory. So thank you.
Thank you. Any additional public comment? All right, thank you very much for public comment. We'll go on now to item F, which is presentations, and we welcome Meals on Wheels, Maureen Kanwisher and Sheena Sullivan. Welcome. Yes. Thank you.
Good evening, Mayor and Board of Trustees. I'm actually Ana Arias, the Director of Community and Latino Engagement for Coal Creek Meals on Wheels. And as most of you know, this is Mo Kanwisher, our intrepid board member, board president, not just a member, board president. Our executive director, talented Sheena Sullivan, couldn't join us tonight. She's on travel. But on behalf of all of us, we'd like to thank you for having us here this evening. And speaking of thank yous, we're immensely grateful to you for your past financial support, $2,000 in 2018. This has helped us serve 1,046 meals and provide safety checks to Superior residents in the past year. By the way, we'd also like to thank the town of Superior and Lydia, your recreation coordinator, for creating these beautiful birthday bags with cards and some yummy treats that our volunteer drivers share on your behalf with Superior residents celebrating birthdays. At CCMOW, we are honored, really, by our mission to offer delicious and nutritious hot meals, safety checks, and referral services to our clients in need, which helps them live with dignity in their own homes. And by the way, in addition to our food being nutritious, the yumminess factor of our food is off the scale. I'll share shortly a little bit more about that when I dispel some common myths. We provide two main services. The first of these is our delivery program, which serves folks in need in Lafayette, Louisville, Erie, and Superior, regardless of age, income, illness, disability, documentation status. And our second program, our on-site dining program that we operate as part of a partnership with the municipality of Lafayette, and where everyone is welcome. Just to give you a couple more insights on our programs, our delivery program is offered 5 days a week. We also offered weekend meals that are delivered on Fridays by our amazing, committed volunteer drivers who also conduct the safety checks on the clients in the 4 communities that we serve. The cost of the meal is based on monthly income and family size. Our on-site social dining program at Josephine Commons, again in Lafayette, is also offered 5 days a week, and it's part of a senior nutrition program that we run in collaboration with the city of Lafayette. There's a suggested donation of $3.50 for individuals 60 and better, and a cost of $6 for those younger. And of course, no one is ever turned away because of an inability to pay. Now, while our 2 main programs are on-site and delivery, we have 2 complementary initiatives that build on the delivery program. And the first of these initiatives that many of our clients benefit from is called Plates for Pets. It's been well documented that pets can enhance the well-being of their human companions, and we hear of that beneficial impact from our clients with pets. And thanks to Sheena's leadership, we created Plates for Pets, which provides basically monthly a monthly supply of pet food for a Fido, a kitty, a scaly pal, or a feathery companion. It's a very popular program, as you might imagine. And then we also participate in a second initiative that's a county-wide program called Project Homecoming. And this is where any individual returning from the hospital for any reason can receive up to 5 free hot lunches from us to help them get back on their feet. And incidentally, our stellar culinary team can accommodate a number of dietary restrictions, including no nuts, gluten-free, vegetarian, low salt, you get the picture. And now it's time to share and bust some myths. So myth number 1, we only serve Jell-O and mashed potatoes. No, false. In fact, many people think that Meals on Wheels is a conglomerate with chapters in cities across the country, but we are actually independent, community-based organizations, each one of us. So in our case, at Coal Creek Meals on Wheels, it's very, where we make our food from scratch. The reason that we want to inform folks about the distinction is because if somebody had a bad experience with the quality of the food in some other state, it's important that people don't think that that will be the case across the board, and so they don't try us out. So Jell-O and mashed potatoes, nope. Our meals are fresh and they're delicious. And not only are they made from scratch daily, but they're also made by a chef, a sous chef, a garde-manger, a keeper of the food. They're incredibly talented, which translates to scrumptious dishes. And to boot, our nutritious meals are also in large part farm to table. So Isabel Farms donates organic produce weekly for a good part of the year. And our pork, and most of our pork and beef actually come from prize-winning animals at the Boulder County Fair, where community groups purchase the animals at auction and then donate them to us. At CCMLW, we also maintain 3 gardens with fresh herbs that our chefs use for their delicious dishes during the growing season. And finally, not only does our culinary team provide yummy and nutritious fare, but they also change the menu all the time. So there's a great deal of variety of fresh foods that is basically offered to our on-site and delivery client. All right, myth number 2, we only serve seniors. False. Again, while the majority of our clients are seniors, we serve anyone, regardless of age, illness, disability, or income, who would have difficulty accessing a meal otherwise. In fact, the percentage of our clients are homebound, disabled young people. And we expect the number of younger families to increase as we continue to engage with more Latino families. Myth number 3, you have to be struggling financially to benefit from our services. Not at all. Everyone can benefit from our delicious, healthy meals and safety checks, regardless of income, low or high. Now, our meals, as I mentioned briefly, on a sliding scale based on income. So you could pay $0, you could pay $1, or the highest rate is $7 per meal. The average is about $3.50. Now, before I continue with my comments, I think Mo has a quick story to share about this particular myth.
Hi, everyone. I just want to share with you an anecdotal story that hits home right here in Superior. We have a single gentleman who lives alone here in Superior who his neighbors were encouraging to get Meals on Wheels for years. And he is financially stable and kept declining to get meals and was malnourished and went hungry a lot of times because he was unable to go to the grocery store, unable to cook for himself, and because he didn't want charity. And as soon as we were able to tell him, well, geez, you can pay for these meals, they're $7 a piece, he changed. He now gets meals 5 days a week delivered to him from a Superior volunteer who also delivers to the other people who live here in Superior. So I just wanted to tell you about these myths, is that anyone who needs a meal, any age, any status, if you need a meal and you have the ability to pay for the meal delivered to your home, great. If you don't, we do fundraising so that we can help pay for those meals. So I just want to tell you a real story happens right here.
All right, so here are a few slides that speak a little bit to our community impact. So last year, more than 38,200 meals were provided to our clients that reached more than 470 folks who were seniors and homebound. in the 4 East Boulder communities that we serve. That represents about a 4% increase in the meals served over 2017. And as you can see, about 25,700 of those meals were delivered, and more than 12,400 were served at our social on-site program. And of course, we couldn't do any of this without the dedication and constant support from about 175 active volunteers, from drivers to kitchen helpers to ambassadors to special projects teams and board members. We survey our clients with some regularity, and year after year, they tell us that our services help them live independently, that find it difficult to get another lunchtime meal elsewhere, and that they eat more healthily and feel healthier. And to boot, they also share with us that our services give them the opportunity to live with greater and richer social interactions. 87% of our delivery clients socialize more because of our volunteer visits, and about 99% of our diners at Josephine Commons socialize more by coming to our lunch program. Now, hopefully what I've shared with you gives you an idea of the kinds of needs that we are serving here in the communities of Lafayette, Louisville, Erie, and Superior. We really are filling a niche. Thanks to the Coal Creek Meals on Wheels board, the recognition to strive for ongoing improvements and innovations to our programs that reflect diverse community needs doesn't stop there. An important initiative launched last summer, thanks to CCMOW's strategic vision and commitment to lower language and cultural barriers to access our services amongst a growing population segment. And thanks in part also to a $25,000 grant from the Next 50 initiative, CCMOW established the original as well as the current position that I've been honored to hold as its first bicultural, bilingual director of community and Latino engagement. Now, in this role, I have 2 main missions. The first of these is to ensure that no member of the East Boulder communities that we serve who could benefit from our delicious and nutritious hot meals and daily safety checks goes without because of a language or a cultural barrier to our services. About 11% of our clients identify as Hispanic. Our goal is to increase that number to 17% by June of this year, which would more accurately reflect the percentage of Hispanics in East Boulder County. And I'm happy to report that we're making excellent progress toward that goal. In my second primary mission is to help our organization become more culturally competent, inclusive, responsive, proactive, through the development of a pragmatic, engaging, and fun curriculum for staff, for operational volunteers, and for board members as we navigate the first phase of the diversity, equity, and inclusive continuum. And as part of this initiative, we're also developing strategies and plans to help grow in the makeup, really, of our staff, our volunteers, and our board members to be more representative of the diversity that exists in our communities. And as we baseline and train internally to be more culturally competent, we can create more inclusive and collaborative cultural exchange and learning opportunities with all of our other community stakeholders. And I think now Mo will share with you a few insights on our growth and capacity.
I just want to share with you that Meals on Wheels is growing, and thanks to the support of the town of Superior and the other municipalities that that support us. Last October, when we were doing our 2019 budget, we budgeted for about 5% growth. We had 4% growth last year. We thought, oh, it'll probably stay a little flat, and we increased 1%. We are already growing between November of last year and this right year to date at about a 16% growth rate. One of the issues that we're facing that we want you to be aware of is we're running out of capacity at the commercial kitchen that we have in Lafayette to produce the meals that we need to produce. So we've engaged with a local consultant who is going to help us have that commercial kitchen be more efficient, and we're looking at what investments we need to make. But I think one of the things we're going to look forward to is perhaps having a second location. And we would love to have a location somewhere in this part of our service area. We're on the far, far east end of Lafayette right now. And it would be terrific if we could have a satellite location, perhaps somewhere in Superior. I don't know what that would look like. I don't know when we're going to need it. But I just want to let you all know that don't be surprised if you hear us come back to you and say, we need some ideas. And we also want to be able to get the word out to more Superior residents that this service is available to them. So I just want to give you that heads up. How are you doing this? Okay.
Hey,
thank you.
Hey, Mo, quick question. Before we leave that slide, can you speak to what is the attributing cause to that big jump over the past few months?
Of course. We think it's three things. One is Anna being on board full time and doing her job, and she's going out there and engaging with folks. We also know that there is an aging of our population, and Meals on Wheels is often used by seniors or 60-year-olds and better, as Anna says. And thirdly, we're doing our job and we're getting the word out, and we're letting folks know that this service is available to them. So it's all three of those in combination.
Thanks.
You're welcome.
Oops, there we go. So, just to wrap up briefly, here are three ways that you could get more involved with Coal Creek Meals on Wheels if any of you wish to take on this mission. One, you are cordially invited to join us at lunch, for lunch at on-site program at Josephine Commons in Lafayette. You could try our delicious lunches. You could get a mini tour. In the packets that Mo handed, you'll find a menu in English and Spanish. We hope to whet your appetite, as well as my business card with my contact information. Two, you would also be welcome to schedule a ride-along, which is a really fun experience and very heartwarming, where you'd actually accompany a trained volunteer and see what the whole meal delivery and safety check experience is like firsthand. And thirdly, you could become a day sponsor. Think NPR day sponsor model. Again, you'll have a little bit more information about that in the packets. And finally, as Mo mentioned, your community of Superior is growing. Our organization is clearly also growing. And as we consider our future goals and Superior continues to grow, how can we best support the town of Superior? We'd love to hear your thoughts on this once you've had a chance to consider how we might be able to help you. I'd appreciate the opportunity to follow up with each of you in the next couple of months and meet for maybe 20, 30 minutes and hear your ideas. So thank you very much. Muchas gracias.
Thank you very much. Appreciate the presentation. I've been to lunch at the Josephine Commons facility before, and would encourage all the board members to go do that. It's a great experience, and you're doing great work out there. So
thank you all for your time.
Thank you.
Thank you.
I have a quick question. Thank you for both of you for coming and for what you're doing. Of the 38,000 meals that you're doing annually, approximately how many families are you serving here in Superior? Are you seeing trends increase, decrease, stay the same? Tell us about like the impact here specifically.
Okay, in Superior, I know that there's 8 families currently being serviced. All of our deliveries, some folks get them 5 days a week, some get them Monday, Tuesdays, Wednesdays, some get them Monday, Wednesday, Friday. So it's hard to say how many meals are being delivered right now off the top of my head. But I believe of the families who are receiving them here in Superior, they do get them 5 days a week. So it was 1,400 and some meals? 1,400 and some meals were last year, 2018, delivered to Superior residents. We know that can increase, and we ask your help in helping us spread the word that it's available.
And are those families, the 8 families that you're serving, is that trend holding? Is it growing? Is it
It's been flat in Superior for the last few years. Mm-hmm. We did have one family about 3 years ago who were young, in their 30s. The father had a terminal illness. The mother had 2 young sons. She was caring for the father at home. And for about 3 months, we delivered meals for her 2 sons every day at no cost to them. The father, unfortunately, has passed away, and they no longer get those meals. So you'll see a little dip in number from that because it was 3 meals a day for 3 months that we're no longer providing. And that was a Superior family, too.
I saw on your website that you're also looking for kids to volunteer and create cards and gifts to go along with the items. I'm wondering if that might be something we could involve our Superior Youth Leadership Council.
That'd be terrific.
Okay.
Yeah, our clients love it when they get a card with a backwards E written in it, and, you know, we just stick it right in their lunch bag. Sometimes they make placemats, and they never get eaten on. They get hung on a refrigerator. So that would be terrific.
Okay.
Yeah, greeting cards, birthday cards, just hi, how are you cards, have a sunny day cards. All works. By the way, I wanted to tell you all the photographs that you saw in this presentation and in the information we handed to you are real clients from this area. So none of those are stock photos. Those are all people right from here that are clients of Meals on Wheels.
I just have a question about the program that you have for folks who have had surgery or coming home from the hospital. How do you promote that within a community? I mean, I happen to have a neighbor who had some surgery a while ago, and her husband, he was sick and she worked. So it would have been great to know about that program. How do you communicate that program? Because, I mean, any of us could have surgery and come home. So I'd like to know more about that.
Several ways. One is all the local hospitals have these pamphlets that are in your book that says a Project Homecoming. They all have those available, and supposedly they give them out when people are discharged. So I say supposedly because I can't manage whether that happens or not, but they are there. We do occasionally have to refill the supply, so we know they're going somewhere. Secondly, we have a partnership with a pharmacy in Lafayette who on their pharmacy bags also includes that. So when someone gets a prescription after surgery or a prescription anytime, they get notification that that Project Homecoming is available. We do it through word of mouth and through presentations like this, and for letting people know who can be in the position to recommend it, that it's there and it's available for them. And again, that's anyone of any age. It's for new moms who just come home after having a baby. It's for anyone who needs a meal, and that's free, 5 free meals. And then oftentimes people will extend those meals if it's helping them.
Have we ever put anything about it in our town newsletter, Matt? You don't remember it? Okay.
Jack.
I would like to see if maybe we could do that. That's, I mean, particularly with our own little local hospital right over here, but I just think that's a service that any of us could use at any time, particularly someone like me who lives in a single household.
Yep.
And so let's put in a couple of times.
Not kidding, our food is good. I'm a bit of a foodie, and I eat there all the time, and I've never had a bad meal.
Yeah, well, I'm a terrible cook, so when, you know.
Yeah, see, it's a match made in heaven.
I need to go in the hospital, so I, you know. But anyway, I just think that's a really great service that we have, particularly in some of our townhome communities. We have a lot of one-person households, and when they get sick, that would be a great service to know we have available.
Absolutely.
And Matt, I'd also like to see if and when we do put this in the Sentinel, can we also include some messaging around the fact that people can pay the full cost and that that's completely acceptable? Because I know that was news to me. I would never have thought that I would be somebody who could do this. So I think that's great.
Yeah, I was going to make a similar request that I think really reinforcing that you're not receiving charity care, you're actually supporting a kitchen by paying for the cost. And if you're uncomfortable with that $7 covering I looked at your menu, stuff does look pretty good. I'm sure you would accept the donation. I think there's a number.
I'm sure we would.
There are very charitable people here in Superior, and I think about how many times we've brought meals to families, or frankly have had meals brought to us as we've had kids or been sick, and what an amazing resource. So I think we should do more to support that. And thank you for telling us that your kitchen is starting to look at capacity, and so we should be supportive there.
I just want to put it in the back of everyone's heads, because we're going to be looking to get creative about how we continue to grow and provide this resource for all of our 4 municipalities.
Great.
So
thank you.
You're welcome.
Great.
Anything else?
Thank you very much.
All right, thank you all.
All right, we are on to our consent agenda. We have items 3A, B, and D. I'll entertain a motion to approve A, B, and D on the consent agenda. So moved. Motion by Mayor Pro Tem Lasis, second by Trustee Lish. All those in favor? All right, thank you. That passes unanimous. And we've pulled 3C to be discussed with item number 4, and Laura, you pulled 3E. If you want to go ahead with your questions on 3E.
Sure. So for 3E, I'd like to discuss this a little bit. While I recognize that the high home prices in the Denver and Boulder metro areas can really make homeownership almost a distant dream for some people, I am just really against the 100% mortgages that are proposed in this for 2 major reasons. First, the fact that they have a much higher default rate than traditional mortgages. And second, that the home buyers themselves end up at a much greater risk if the market dips. They might quickly owe significantly more than the home value. The program that we're looking at here would apply to those with a credit score of 640 or higher. But for those unaware, 640 is rated a fair credit score, meaning you've had some issues in the past making timely payments. For regular conforming mortgages, a down payment usually needs to be 20 to 25%. While FHA loans offer 3.5% down payments, I'm really concerned about making it easy for people to purchase homes with all the risks that come with home ownership without first ensuring their ability to save up an emergency fund and be able to make timely payments. The 20% down payments, while certainly prohibitive in the expensive Colorado real estate market, are extremely effective at preventing mortgage defaults. People work hard to avoid defaulting because first, they have considerable equity, and second, they're unlikely to end up underwater even if home prices drop. In my opinion, this program's 0 to 5% down payments are encouraging people to get into homes that they can't afford. I also want to note that this particular program does not target first-time home buyers. First-time home buyers have other programs and options that are a better fit, so this program would be more likely to be used by people who already own homes. Speaking with both people in the target demographic, that is home buyers with credit scores in the 600s, and with lenders, both parties said that programs would make the pool of people competing for homes even more competitive. So perhaps even driving up prices and making it harder for first-time home buyers to get into homes. I'm certainly no expert on mortgages, but I'm much more inclined to support a program like the one founded earlier this year by the Denver School of Science and Technology, which benefits teachers who often have a steady salary but not a lot of money left over to save. The DSST launched a pilot with San Francisco startup Landed, where the home buyer puts up 10% of the purchase price as a down payment. The brokerage puts up 10%, the other 10%. This results in a shared investment where the home buyer makes absolutely no payments on the down payment support, but upon the sale or refinance, Landed gets their 10% back, as well as either 25% of the appreciation or the loss, thereby taking on some of the risk for the homeowner. To me, that's a great example of a program that helps get more people into homes while still ensuring that they're qualified buyers with the ability to save. And I'd be much more inclined to support a program of that nature.
Okay, thank you. This was brought to the agenda by a suggestion of mine via Metro Mayors. The city of Denver has and runs this program and encourage other municipalities to sign on. There's no cost to us, and not really sure if it would be applicable to very many people, but I figured, it's just another resource to help people get into homes, and certainly hear the concerns you have, but I still think it's something we should consider. Others?
Go ahead. I purchased my first home in 1993, maybe 1994. I had a decent job. I worked for the Public Health Service. I think I was at GS7 at the time. So certainly didn't have very much by way of savings. My grandmother had passed recently and had left her, I think it was a 1982 Thunderbird. That was not a cool year for Thunderbird, 1982. But she didn't drive it very much, and so I was able to sell it for $6,000. I was able to use that $6,000 for a down payment of that condo. I don't think I've purchased probably 4 or 5 homes since then. I rolled that same $6,000 from the generous donation of my grandmother into a pretty expensive home in Rock Creek. I was lucky that my grandmother didn't have bills or health care, or she had a car that was paid for. I feel privileged to receive that. I didn't know anything about this program. I'm a bit of a libertarian, as I will occasionally talk about, so I usually cringe when the government kind of gets in our, we're here to help you. This is a really impressive program, and it's evolved. And effective February 1st, it's different. It's no longer a grant; it's a loan, and it's a loan that is not collateralized by the home, so it's effectively forgivable. It has a limited pool of funds. It has fantastic reviews. A number of other cities in Denver and North Denver area, including Boulder, have already approved this. When we think about what we could do from an affordable housing perspective, we're really challenged in this community and in other communities because it's a beautiful place and we build beautiful homes and it's really expensive. But if this, which has an income limit of $134,000, which is an insane amount of money, like that's a lot of money. But if somebody's earning that kind of money, they still need to qualify for the loan. This doesn't automatically qualify somebody to buy a $400,000, $500,000, $600,000 house that they can't afford. They still have to qualify for the loan. If they would otherwise qualify for the loan, this will provide an additional non-recoverable loan for the down payment. This has my full support, and saying yes on this is a top 5 trustee moment for me. I'm proud of this. I love that this town will support this.
I was reading an article today, and it was talking about not the mortgage loan crisis, but the eviction crisis that was going on in Colorado. And just in last year alone, there was 47,000 evictions in Colorado. It's like 865 per week. And, you know, we have a housing crisis here in Colorado. We have a housing crisis nationally. And it's not just on, you know, finding affordable homes for people to purchase, but it's finding affordable rents. Rents have increased something like 22% in the past year. Like, that is ludicrous. And, you know, the problem is that you've got, you know, 47,000 families that are getting evicted, and then they have no place to find a home. And that's going to feed into the homeless problem that we have along the Front Range. So, you know, this is a big problem, and it's not something that, you know, we can solve with a discussion here on the dais tonight, and it's not something that we're going to solve with this one particular program. But I echo Trustee Ryan's point. I think that this is a ambitious and I think well-intentioned program that is going to serve a need for people who are, you know, looking to actually, you know, purchase a home. And, you know, this is not going to result in any commitment of taxpayer dollars for residents here in Superior. This is all getting funded by Denver. All that this program is asking us to do is to allow those funds to be used to purchase homes in Superior. And it may not be used, right? You know, there may never be somebody who's actually participating in this program who is able to find a house that they can afford here in Superior because the housing's so unaffordable. So to me, this is really a showing of solidarity along the Front Range community, which I think has downstream consequences. We're going to want our neighbors to, you know, support us on regional transportation issues, on opposition to Rocky Flats oil and gas development, and that is a two-way street. Supporting a program like this goes a long way to building, I think, the relationships that we need to have as a community, separate and apart from it being, I think, a worthwhile program. So I think that we should move forward and support it. Thank you.
So I'd agree with everything Trustee Ryan, Trustee Laces said. One of the things that struck me about this program, when you look at the subprime mortgage crisis of 2007, 8, and 9, a lot of it came down to predatory practices, people not being educated in what they're getting into, and really people biting off more they can chew. What we see in this program is not only is it not a overly burdensome amount that people are getting into second or third mortgages or taking on more than they would be able to otherwise. But it's taken a opportunity for people who, I mean, I think about people in my segment who are maybe young 30s, 20s, who have families, who are trying to make ends meet, need to expand their space for their children, but don't have that down payment. I mean, this is the sort of thing that can help people get into the homes that they can succeed with. The biggest thing that I see here that's a benefit is it comes with free home buyer education programs that are available to all buyers. Great. We're educating our community, making a better, responsible citizenship, and we're helping them get into a more solid financial future. I couldn't support this more.
Okay, thanks. Any other comments?
Just a couple to add on to everything that's been said, and I don't want to leave Trustee Kaczynski out there on a limb, because I do agree with a lot of what she said. With what we saw in 2007 and 2008, it was a lot of predatory practices, but it was a lot of people just getting in way over their head. Because everyone thought the homes would continue to appreciate, they could leverage the equity and have no problem, making the payments. And obviously we saw that it didn't work out. But fundamentally, when I saw this in the consent agenda, I said, wow, DPS just had a teacher strike, because there's plenty of teachers making $50,000 a year that can come close to getting the down payment. We need to help those people, whether it's living in Wheat Ridge, Westminster, Superior, wherever. This provides a little tiny bump to get that down payment. My wife and I waited a long time to buy our house, so it was no problem for us. But when we started off, getting everything together, pulling everything together was not an easy process to make. And then if you throw in kids into that, it's even more difficult. And we had great paying jobs. This is fantastic. I think, the fact that it's, you still have to qualify, it's still going to be screened. I think we as a country have to do a lot more about educating people on how to manage their finances. There is no question there. There's probably a big debt bomb coming for all of us, but this is not going to be part of that in my mind. I think this is going to be a fantastic program. It's probably going to run out of funds very quickly. I am more than willing to support it.
Okay, thanks. Sandy?
I began the review going, first of all, there's no way I believe that this is actually going to work the way they say it's going to work. Like Laura, I looked at it with a lot of trepidation. I happen to work in a business environment that the people who I work with every day, and I mean the people who are employed in the nonprofit sector, we do not make a lot of money. And we choose to serve, to make less money because of the commitment we have to what we do for a living. Most of my colleagues could not afford to buy, I could not buy a home in Superior today. I could in 2002, but I could not do it today. As I read through this program, I was absolutely thrilled to think of my colleagues who work in the nonprofit sector who might be able to afford to buy a home because of a program like this. I 100% support it. I think they'll be out of money in a day. I mean, I have no idea what their pool is, but to be able to see colleagues of mine be able to afford a home would be a fabulous thing. So I fully support this.
Okay, thanks. With that, I'll entertain a motion.
All right, I make a motion to approve Town of Superior Resolution number R-12, Series 2019, a resolution of the Board of Trustees of the Town of Superior authorizing and approving participation in the Metro Mortgage Assistance Plus program and approving the associated participation agreement.
Okay, motion by Mayor Pro Tem Lasis, second by Trustee Hammerly. All those in favor? Okay, Lish, Ryan, Folsom, Lasis, Shaw, and Hammerly opposed. Swierczynski. All right, motion passes.
I do want to wish the program great success, and I hope that a number of new people are able to become homeowners.
Thank you.
The good news is we had a dialogue about it, so we increased awareness. That makes me happy.
That's right. That's right. All right. Thank you, Paul, for coming.
Can we also make sure we give some information about this in the Superior? I mean, you know, yes. I know it'll be in the recap of the meeting, but we have a lot of renters in Superior, and they may be right on the edge of being able to buy a home in Superior.
Yes.
And I'd like to see us communicate.
I'm glad that I'm glad it got a warm reception. I wasn't sure what kind of reception it would get, but I never know with this board, but I get a lot of things brought my way through Metro mayors, and it's great when some things work for us. So.
Could you keep us informed too of the success, if they give you some ongoing reports of the success? I think that's a great idea.
All right. We are on to item number 4, adoption of a resolution approving a master lease agreement with Verizon for small cell facilities. And we're also discussing consent agenda item 3C, which is adoption of an ordinance amending section 16-170 and article 31 of chapter 16 of the Superior Municipal Code concerning wireless communication facilities.
Thank you, Mayor. Debbie Essert is here from Verizon Wireless. Thank you for coming again tonight. This is a continuation of the meeting we had in January on this item. How would you like to proceed? Do you want to discuss either one of these items first, or?
Can you just confirm there are no changes there have been no changes, it's just a pure continuation?
As far as the code changes, there have been no changes.
There have been no changes to the code. There have been changes to the master license agreement, which are shown in the red line.
Okay.
And the master license, those changes were, there was discussion at the last meeting about some concern about these being installed in front of people's homes. And in discussions with Debbie and their attorneys, one of the things that we came up with is to prioritize and point out, which you see in the red line, that our first priority is at intersections of streets for the installation of these facilities. So that whenever we look at locations, that's one of the first places we're going to look, whether it be on an Excel street light pole in that area or a town facility, which would be a traffic signal, most likely.
And the license agreement also changed to expressly call out the 4G, 5G.
Correct.
That's correct.
So,
and Debbie's here, I think, to answer. I think there were some practicality type questions about where these would go. So I think if you still have questions about that, I think Debbie can answer those certainly better than I can. So.
Good evening, Mayor Folsom, Board of Trustees. Debbie Essert, Verizon Wireless, 3131 South Vaughan Way, Aurora, Colorado. Thank you for having us back. We're excited to be back in front of you tonight to further our discussions that we had from late January. I think we had really robust discussion at the January meeting, so I don't know if there's anything specific you want me to cover again. I think Matt and Kendra both talked about the changes that we came and had a meeting to try to address some of the concerns that were raised at the last board meeting that I attended. So if there are specific questions, it's probably better use of our time that I get those questions directly and that we try to answer those so that you feel as informed as you possibly can be, so that hopefully we can make a decision to move forward with the MLA this evening.
Okay, Laura and Ken.
So I have a question to start. I know last time we talked about the ability to co-locate tenants on the same pole, and we understood that Excel has said that on their poles, they will only allow one tenant per pole. I wanted to ask on any new poles, any new poles that might need to be erected or on any town poles, what would be the possibility for other wireless carriers to co-locate there?
So there's two flavors I think that you're talking about, right? One would be if Verizon comes in and there is a need because there's not an existing vertical asset. If there's a need for Verizon to place their own pole in the right of way, would there be an opportunity to co-locate? And what I would tell you, and I think I mentioned this early on, when I was back here in April of last year, I said, no, we weren't going to be able to co-locate. It really wasn't something that we thought was technically feasible. We certainly are looking at that as an industry now, and as a good corporate citizen, we're looking at that possibility and trying to figure that out. With co-location comes compromise, and that's one of the things that the town will need to take into consideration if they want to go down a path of co-location. Typically, I think we talked about this last time as well, it's going to mean larger equipment, larger base equipment to accommodate multiple carriers and the electronics necessary to support the facilities, as well as potential increase in height because of not being able to deploy signals from the same antennas because of different technologies, things of that nature. So I don't want to rule out the possibility of co-location because I do think that technically it might exist. Today, we are not seeing any co-location on any of our infrastructure that we're deploying simply because most municipalities have found it's more aesthetically pleasing to come up with a standard design and have that deployed throughout the town versus having some larger facilities deployed.
Okay.
So, and if I could, sorry, that was for more Verizon. So when it comes to town assets, typically I think one of the things we're looking at are going to be your traffic signals. Again, looking at that, it may be a better situation again to look at. Typically in a traffic pattern, you're going to have 4 poles, right, at an intersection. So is it better to just look at single co-location there, or again, larger infrastructure to accommodate multiple carriers? Certainly, I don't think it's not out of a technical possibility realm. It's just more aesthetics. What do you want to see, and what does it mean for overall height and deployment?
So I guess for the rest of the board, my understanding was that there were other municipalities that had essentially put as a condition that it's required for 2 tenants to be able to co-locate on any new poles. And that was what I was going to ask for as a condition. Certainly hearing what you're saying, I'm wondering if it would be possible to add a condition that we would have the option to co-locate on.
It's already in there. It says when practicable. So basically what happens is Verizon has to come in and show us that it's not practicable, and that's the same language that other municipalities have.
Okay, so the not practicable does cover it.
Yes.
Great. I also wanted to ask around the design of the poles, which I know we haven't really touched on too much in the agreement, but I wanted to see if it would be possible to specify the design of the poles specific to zoning. So for example, putting stealth poles in the residential areas while we're using some of the more basic wooden poles in, we don't have industrial areas, but more of the commercial kind of areas.
So when it comes to Xcel's already come up with a design for replacement of their streetlights, and it is what we would call a concealed pole. So all electronics and all antennas will be internal to the pole. That design was actually presented to the town, and you guys have accepted that. That actual pole design is mirrored off of what we were already doing. We actually were doing that design first and foremost, so our intent is to continue with that same sort of concealed design in all areas of deployment. So for us, I think we can certainly work with your request, because that is our intention, is to move forward with that. I don't know that we can.
Yeah, I mean, that would be staff's intention as well, as when we review these applications for installations, that they match as closely as possible to the current design that's in the community.
And that's also set forth in the design standards attached to the MLA.
Okay. And then finally wanted to ask around the locations in there, looking at how close each antenna is to the other antennas. So I was noticing that Petaluma, California had regulations where they said that no wireless antenna would be within 1,500 feet of another wireless antenna. So essentially avoiding everything clustered together. Is that a possibility for inclusion?
I would tell you that is a very slippery slope to go down because of propagation of the wireless signals and the fact that small cell technology, and especially once we get to 5G technology, may not propagate to that distance. So having that setback requirement or that distance separation can start to get into a prohibition of service. And so it is not something I would recommend.
I don't think it's legal. I'll just be blunt.
Okay.
I don't think it's legal because it prohibits service, and we can't adopt any regulation that prohibits service. So,
okay.
While it may depend on topography and some other things, I imagine that 1,500 feet is too far. You can correct me if I'm wrong there, but you need to go to the bottom.
Yeah, I mean, Melissa, I don't know if you'd like to speak to that at all.
So Melissa Reagan with Sherman and Howard, we represent Verizon Wireless as outside counsel, but the 1,500 feet for sure would be a prohibition of service. And so long as we can come in and demonstrate that if you guys were to enact that regulation and it prohibits it, then that would be would violate the FCC, TCA, et cetera, federal law. And so other jurisdictions have not agreed to that for the small cells deployment, especially because I think right now the radius of a small cell is somewhere between 200 and 300 feet of the propagation. And so, you know, not that we're deploying them that frequently, but just in order for them to be effective, that's the way that we've done it.
Okay. Laura, do you have anything? Okay, Ken.
So I think in looking at our different town listservs and groups and whatnot, there's a bit of a misnomer about what the code tonight and the MLA aims to do. Kendra, would you mind giving a 1 or 2 minute elevator pitch about how we are kind of restricted by both federal and state law in what we, the town of Superior, have the ability to regulate in this circumstance?
Sure. So basically, under both federal and state law, we were required to allow these, and they are a use by right in every single public right-of-way. So we can't zone them out. We have to allow them. If we impose regulations that effectively prohibit them, just like the 1,500-foot distance requirement would, then we're in violation of federal law. So, and I think one of the practical issues here is that the areas where these are most needed are residential areas, because that's where everyone's using the most data. These facilities, and again, I'm probably speaking out of turn, this is more for you, but these facilities are needed for data, and most of the data is used residentially, so in areas like Superior. So that's where they're needed, and so these will go into residential areas. There's not a lot we can do about it. Just, to be very blunt, they are under both state and federal law very heavily protected. And I believe in both this master license agreement and the ordinance, we've done as much as we possibly can to do this. There was some reference to Denver's code, but Denver's code, and we had this meeting, and Denver's code was adopted prior to some of the most recent FCC orders, and even Denver's code is changing. So Denver's code, which seems to be slightly more restrictive than ours right now, is actually not going to be once it's revised to comply with the most recent FCC orders. And I'll be honest with you, every single FCC order we see is more in favor of these facilities and less in favor of local control. So.
Okay, and I think you said it in your answer, but I think it bears repeating. So in your professional judgment, does the master license agreement, in conjunction with the proposed revision to our town code, provide for the maximum legal authority possible for the town to regulate wireless communication facilities within the best interest of our residents?
Yes.
So with that stated, I think the one thing that is important for us as a town board is making sure that as these go forward, they have the least negative impact, aesthetically or otherwise, on our residents. And I think the priorities that we have listed do just that. At this point, I don't think I have any additional questions. Thank you.
Thanks. Kevin and then Neil.
Do you have the ability today to provide service within the service area as required under the regulation? Do you have the ability today, using today's technology, to provide service within our service area?
I'm not sure,
Reading directly from the regulation.
Right, so I think...
Using today's technology, do you have the ability to provide service within the service area?
I think in some ways we are limited on being able to address residential areas because current zoning codes for macro facilities don't allow for placement of macro facilities within residential areas. As mentioned, the FCC and the state laws are opening up the public rights of way as a use by right to allow us to do that. So
I understand. So I'm going to try it again. Maybe the fourth time will work. So I understand what is being proposed. I'm asking today, do you have the ability to provide service within the service area that we are legislating over?
I just want to know with or without this MLA. That's my only question.
Without the MLA?
No.
Thank you.
I want to thank you, Ms. Escher, for coming back in. You know, I think we've all learned a lot more about the regulations since you were here a month ago. I personally have bombarded town council as well as scoured the web on FCC rulings, House Bill 1163, et cetera, et cetera. I saw your name as a signatory on the Denver guidelines from 2 years ago, and I think it's fantastic that Verizon is out there in front trying to work with the towns and cities under the guidelines. At the time, obviously, as we already alluded to, post the FCC rulings in September, that's going to get rewritten. No big deal. I understand that. And I think for our town as well, I want to see Verizon set the golden standard for how to proceed with 4G infill. 5G is a pipe dream as far as I'm concerned. It doesn't matter. Right now, we're talking about 4G infill. I'd love to see that Verizon continue to, end up being the golden sort of poster boy, so to speak, for bringing the infill in the least disruptive and eyesore type manner. Personally, I am an engineer. I know that good engineering does require financial compromises. A tower may not work quite as well in Area A as it would in Area B, but Area A may disrupt fewer residents, even though it costs slightly more. I know we can't legislate it, but I really want to see Verizon think about what creates the least disruptive eyesore. You guys probably didn't watch it, but we had a town board meeting here 2 weeks ago to talk about development in what we call downtown Superior. And one of the biggest issues is our view corridors and ceiling height and roof heights. 32 feet is a roof limit for parts of our town. So the 40-foot poles give a lot of folks in town heartburn, because we have spent an inordinate amount of time on dictating what our heights should be for certain buildings. And knowing that between the FCC and the federal and the state legislatures have rolled out 40-foot poles and we can't really do anything about that, does give me pause in terms of what are we actually doing here. So as much as Verizon kind of work with us and push those to the street corners, as we've talked about within the prioritization, which I really like, I'd love to see that going forward. Not a question, sorry. So the really only question here is, as we think about our town maps and everything else, would Verizon have any, because these are all going to be approved by town council or town staff, is Verizon going to have any problem that we have maps on our town website that dictate or indicate where Verizon's towers are?
No, once we make an application, that information becomes public record.
Okay.
And so we have no issues with that.
Okay. That's actually really my only question. Thanks.
Thank you.
I just want to say thank you to town attorney for educating me in this area. A lot of the questions I had last time. I do want the public to understand that we actually have approached the carriers in town because we have issues with cell coverage, and Verizon was one of the ones that we've heard about the most. And so I appreciate the efforts you've made, and I appreciate what town staff has done to try and make this a little more palatable for us. It's something that based on what I now understand of the law, there's not a lot we can do to stop it, but we can try and regulate it so that it is more palatable to our residents. And so I thank you for coming back.
Thank you.
So thank you, Debbie, again for coming back, and also to Verizon for answering the call, because as Trustee Hammerly indicated, this was a problem that has been years in the making. It has been identified by the board. Town staff reached out to Verizon saying, we've got a problem here in Superior. And we reached out, we didn't just reach out to Verizon, we reached out to all the carriers, and Verizon answered that call. And, just anecdotally, we have some neighborhood Facebook groups here in Superior. I posted a poll this weekend, just trying to take the temperature of the community, of people who have Verizon, who's satisfied with the coverage that they're getting in town, and who's not satisfied. And once you factored out the not applicables because they had a different carrier, it was about 90% of the respondents said that they have coverage problems in Superior. And I have now a crowdsourced list of intersections that I'm happy to provide to you in terms of identifying dead zones, because we have them, and they're extremely frustrating. One of the things that, and this isn't just for residential users, one of the things that we heard from a small business owner who processes a lot of credit card transactions mobily on their devices was that they weren't able to actually process credit card transactions at the homes of their customers when they're visiting there, and they actually had to wait until they get back home, and they're actually using, you know, their high-speed internet access through Comcast to actually process the transactions, which actually was costing them like 3 to 5% more for the transaction cost. So, you know, this is not only affecting residents, but it's affecting small business owners. It's affecting people who are traveling through town. So again, thank you for answering the call. We obviously covered a lot when you were here last. Just wanted to clarify for the record. So right now the intention of Verizon is just to be deploying 4G, not 5G in Superior.
That is correct. So our initial intent is for 4G infill to address capacity concerns. Hopefully that'll address some coverage challenges as well. Hopefully someday we'll be bringing 5G. We hear a lot about it, but right now that is not our plans.
Right. And in terms of the number of locations that you're anticipating that would be necessary, I believe when you were here last in January, you said 35. Is that still the plan?
That's our 3-phase plan. So obviously we're not going to come in and immediately make those types of numbers. That will be over time. And as we see things change, as we see how the initial phase 1 rollout happens, those numbers certainly will modify, I would expect. But that is the initial numbers that our RF engineering team has provided for us.
Do you have an understanding of, and I don't want to hold you to a specific commitment here, but the number of available, you know, existing poles that you think you'll be able to utilize versus totally new, independent, freestanding structures that you're going to have to erect?
In additional conversations with Excel, they have indicated that they own over 800 vertical assets in the town of Superior. So obviously we'll be targeting those locations first. And as we've worked with Kendra and Matt on in terms of the hierarchy, we'll obviously be looking at trying to go where there are street intersections. So we'll try to make sure that we're looking at where those Excel assets exist at those corner intersections to try to address the needs as the first priority in the hierarchy.
One thing that I think would be helpful for us would be, you know, as this project is ongoing, if we could have, you know, some periodic reporting in terms of if there are going to be additional structures that are erected. You know, I think the community would certainly like to know so they're not surprised. If it's going into existing, you know, so if there turns out to be 35 that are deployed and we're able to leverage, you know, 30 existing structures and then 5 new freestanding structures need to be erected, I think that would be just helpful from a community outreach perspective and also just to know where they are.
And I think that's a great point. And I think one of the things that we can also do is I have a counterpart that does community engagement. So as we start to deploy, we may want to come out and reach out to any registered neighborhood organizations, any other community groups so that we can educate as we start to deploy so that folks can ask their questions and we can make your community more wireless savvy, if you will, about our network.
And we talked about this also in January, but you know, similarly in terms of community outreach for purposes of crowdsourcing where there are the dead spots, I'm sure the community would be happy to volunteer all the locations that they think, you know, need addressing.
Absolutely.
So if there's some way we can, you know, set up some sort of, you know, a Google form or something where people can just say, okay, the intersection of Rock Creek Circle and Torrey's Peak, it's a dead zone, and the intersection of Indiana and Mount Sopris is a dead zone. I think we do a lot of the work for your engineers, is my thinking.
I think it's great feedback, so I will take that back. We may have to just start with an email communication. You've obviously captured some of that, so I absolutely would welcome that information. And then I've got this as a note to take away and see if we can't develop something.
Okay. And we don't need to spend too much time on this, but if you could just walk the board and the public through kind of the process through which you would go and actually identify, you know, how you would go about phasing in the deployment of these small cells. So you reach out to the town, submitting an application, and you've identified locations. And then how exactly does that work? What is the responsibility of the town? What oversight and veto power does the town have, if any, to your understanding?
Great. So the process really will start with the RF engineering team looking at the areas of need, possibly from some of your citizen input. But we will, first and foremost, the way it works with Excel is we would have to come to the town and get a statement of no objection to co-locate on one of the Excel assets. So that would be one of the first things that we will do, is come and reach out to Matt and say, we've identified this location as a possible co-location for Excel. Do you object? As long as Matt comes back and says, no, there's no town objection to that location, then we'll make an application with Excel. We'll go through the whole due diligence process of making that application with Excel, and then we'll still need to come in and get a right-of-way permit to do any work necessary in the public right-of-way for development of that site. So that's a very high-level sort of overview about how that would work with the town. If we were to place our own pole, if, you know, again, that is the last option in our hierarchy. So we have going at the intersections, going other vertical assets, that's all going to be the same process for Excel. If we're going to make an application with the town, we're going to do the same thing. We're going to put together information and come to the town about your infrastructure and find out if that vertical asset is agreeable for wireless deployment on. And typically that's going to be with Matt, and your public works director would be the most reasonable place to start, because you guys are going to want to evaluate anything that you might be doing with that asset going forward. You know, do you have any other plans? Anything that might impact that asset, we'll look for that input from the town first and then move forward the development. So we'll do drawings to show that the asset is structurally sound for co-location or replacing it, showing you that, again, that concealed type development for replacing that asset. And that's all through the approval process of the town. So if there's something you guys don't like, if you don't like the location, that is all up for discussion, as long as we can find another viable location that's near the original site. So when you talk about veto power, that's kind of where that's going to come into play, is talking with your public works department about a particular location.
And I understand with respect to kind of existing traffic signals or Excel poles in the public right of way, like at a major intersection or something like that, where it's clearly like this is right of way, this is not private property. There are Excel street lights that are on in people's front yards. Is Excel planning on installing any of these small cells in any of those poles?
Still, this agreement is solely for the public rights of way. So if Excel, through an easement or whatnot, has placed a streetlight in somebody's private property, so again, not in the public right of way, that is not an asset that we would look to co-locate on, because again, it's not in the public right of way. We are only looking at deploying on Excel assets that are in the public right of way.
So our residents don't need to worry about Verizon and Verizon contractors entering private property or anything like that?
No, all of our work should be done in the public right of way. We should have no reason to proceed onto anybody's private property to make these deployments.
Okay. And those are my questions. Thank you.
Thank you.
Can you describe how you connect to the network? I mean, from these pole sites, I mean, how do you connect to the network? I mean, is there trenching involved to get to somewhere?
Right. So
as
part of a wireless facility, you have to have basically three components. You have to have an antenna, you have to have power, and you have to have fiber as your backhaul. So we do use a fiber network as part of our connectivity to process the calls. So we will need to install fiber to all of our small cells. So we will look to either, a vendor typically will do that, somebody else will do that. That doesn't come from my side of the organization. But yes, we will need fiber, and depending on the facility type, we'll also need power potentially, maybe upgraded power from Excel. Typically, we're going to need a meter from Excel for our power usage, because we do pay for that. So even if we're on city property, we still have to pay for our electrical use. So we will have to potentially upgrade power to a facility as well.
Okay.
Does that answer your question?
Typically, how far do these fiber I mean, power, I get that, but.
Yeah, the fiber is really
fiber-
difficult for me to answer because I don't know whom might be providing that fiber service. It could already be somebody that's already in the area, and so they could be very near. So it's very difficult for me to actualize how far those fiber poles may have to be because it's really dependent on the carrier that's going to provide that fiber.
I mean, would you be tying into Comcast, for instance? I mean, they're all throughout town, but I mean, do you typically?
There are specific providers that we have to work with because our facilities require dark fiber, and not all fiber providers provide dark fiber. That just means that they're not lighting it and controlling the pathway on either end. They're just providing the actual glass in the ground. So we typically are looking at those types of providers. So not everyone is a dark fiber provider. I'm not a transport engineer, so I don't know exactly what all vendors provide those services for us.
Okay.
So I can't answer that question. I'm sorry.
I have a follow-up question on something you said for Mark, that you wouldn't be in people's private property, but then based on Glenn's question, so there is going to be some trenching required to connect to the fiber.
In the public right of way. So we should not be doing any trenching. We should not need to pull anything in the, that's on private property. Everything we do should be in the public right of way.
So something, right, but sometimes that right-of-way access may be through somebody's yard. We ran into this with Comcast.
So if we have to have an instance where, I certainly have been involved in the past where we've had to connect to a transformer that's been on somebody's private property, we can only do that if Excel themselves secures an easement basically on our behalf to do so. So this is not something where we, wild west, we get to come in and stake our claim and go in somebody's private property. That is not what we are allowed to do. So if we do have to access something on somebody's private property, we have to get their agreement. That is a very rare situation where a transformer's in somebody's private property that we have to connect to, but then we take that up with Excel and the private customer.
Yeah, I'm one of those homes that has the Comcast transformer in my fenced-in backyard. So in that case, there would be an instance, hopefully the rare occasion, but you would, using Excel and potentially an easement, which they have to trench in my backyard.
I can tell you the situations that I've run into, Excel has had to secure an additional easement for our use.
Your Excel's easement won't cover their use.
Okay.
So they would have to come to you, Excel has to come to you and say, we have an easement for our services. This is a different utility, a different service. We have to expand that easement, and then we have to get your permission.
Can you explain, Kendra, how is that different than what Comcast?
No, but Comcast has existing utility easements to
Right,
all
exactly.
the residential
Comcast already
houses.
has easements that cover that. The Excel easement wouldn't cover that. I think that's what you're saying. So there would have to be additional communications with you to get permission you would give permission to Excel to allow Verizon to come in.
Okay, any additional? Yep.
So last week, Trustee Hammerly and I attended a joint meeting with Louisville, and they have gone through some detailed analysis on, basically providing a wireless network to their citizens. One of the things that struck out at me is their data suggests that Verizon has 47% of the Louisville population. Do you have any idea on what it is in Superior? I found the number remarkably higher than I expected, but I can't imagine that we're significantly different. I'm curious if you know.
I don't have that data on the top of my head.
Okay. And did you skip Mobile World Congress to come here, or are you just using this as an excuse?
I did. This was way more important than being at Mobile World Congress, so I am here for you tonight.
Thanks.
All right, any further questions?
I'll make a motion.
Okay.
Discussion?
Do we
I don't
want
have a question, but.
Okay. What do we want to take them one at a time? And we've got the ordinance. I mean, do we want to have why don't we take them separately? So let's have any discussion on the ordinance.
I have two questions for council first before we talk about the ordinance, and it's directed to the ordinance. So these are questions that I think Dan answered, but I just want to make sure that you're saying the same things.
Me too.
The ordinance is broadly applicable and is not carrier specific. So this applies to all mobile carriers.
That's correct.
And so it doesn't just allow Verizon, but allows anybody to install small cell technology in town.
That's correct, and that's also required by law.
Right. Now, if the town approves the ordinance but does not approve an MLA with a carrier, can the carrier install anything under the ordinance?
Well, again, the state law says that this is used by right, but that they must have, quote, local government approval. If we refuse to give that approval, they still have a use by right. So I don't know that anyone's actually tested that, to be completely honest, but the MLA is a better way to go. We're getting a lot more out of it doing it this way than the other way.
Right, we're getting contractual remedies
Exactly.
with Verizon because we're negotiating an arm's length transaction rather than just having an ordinance on the books that we're required to have on the books because federal and state law preempt anything that we want to do.
Right.
Which would then give mobile carriers the ability to do what they want.
Exactly.
So, to that end, I think it's, incumbent to reach out to the other carriers, assuming that the ordinance passes, that it's incumbent upon us to reach out to the other carriers and see if we can get MLAs negotiated with all of them as well. So
Agreed.
we are
And
better
now that we
protected.
have what could be a template MLA, it's helpful because we can show this to people and say, hey, we already have an MLA drafted. So.
Okay. Thank you.
Okay, any further questions? Would it be reasonable to do a motion, a second, and then have discussion after motion and second? Is that, okay? If you want to proceed with the motion on the ordinance, do the ordinance first.
Okay. I move to approve Town of Superior Ordinance number O-5, Series 2019, an ordinance of the Board of Trustees of the Town of Superior, amending Section 16-1-70 and Article 31 of Chapter 16 of the Superior Municipal Code concerning wireless communication facilities.
Okay, motion by trustee Lish, second by Mayor Pro Tem Lasis. Discussion?
This is something that we need to do to comply with federal and state law. And our hands are tied, and I think we need to follow the law. So.
Okay. Any further discussion?
Yeah, I do. I've got to get on my soapbox here. I apologize. Some of you guys have seen my email already, because I think it's imperative that our residents understand, as town council kind of already alluded to, where we are, and it's important that they get the chronological history of what has continued to evolve with state and federal laws, and why I actually think this ordinance is a good idea. On April 18th, 2017, Governor Hickenlooper signed HB 1193, which went into effect July 1st, 2017. HB 1193 requires that the siting, mounting, placement, construction, and operation of small cell facilities is a permitted use by right in any zoning district. According to the statute, telecommunication providers have the right to locate such small cell facilities or small cell networks on light poles, light standards, traffic signals, or utility poles in the use by right way owned by any local government entity. Following on that, a number of cities within our own state worked with the carriers to develop some of their own common sense guidelines. As we noted in our last board meeting on the subject, Denver implemented a number of these guidelines that were signed on by some of the carriers, including Verizon. However, in September of 2018, the FCC issued a declaratory ruling to remove regulatory barriers that would unlawfully inhibit the deployment of infrastructure necessary to support services. As a result of this ruling, most of the guidelines are out the window and they're being rewritten. Specifically, Denver is no longer allowed to limit tower heights to 35 feet or even keep a 250-foot radial distance to other freestanding towers. They say that politics is local, but the reality is that, in my mind, unelected regulators have determined what your town government can and cannot do as it specifically relates to wireless communications. Under the guise of fear that we will lose to the Chinese on the race to the 5G, I personally feel that these rules have been rushed through. To say I don't like it is an understatement. However, inaction is not an option. If we don't develop an ordinance, any carrier can waltz into this town and put up towers almost anywhere they want based on the FCC guidelines or rules. This ordinance at least gives us a small amount of cover and the ability to push back, albeit slightly. Verizon is here, on our request, and I fully support moving forward with the WCF ordinance and the MLA. Thank you.
Okay, thanks, Neil. Any further discussion? Okay, we have a motion and a second for ordinance number 5. All those in favor? Okay, passes unanimous. All right, we are on to the next item, which is the resolution R13. Somebody like to make a motion?
I'll make a motion to approve Town of Superior Resolution Number R-13, Series 2019. A resolution of the Board of Trustees of the Town of Superior approving a master license agreement with Verizon Wireless, LLC.
Okay, motion by Mayor Pro Tem Lasis. Second by Trustee Hammerly. Discussion?
Sure, I'll go. Similar to what Trustee Shaw indicated, I just don't like this process, right? I don't like the characterization that we called out for help and here comes Verizon as the savior, right? I don't recall having a board discussion or a community-wide discussion whether or not we should call Verizon and come in and save us. They're a $126 billion per year organization. Well, let's not pretend that this is true innovation. This is hanging boxes on our light poles and our street lights with a potential health risk that at this point is unknown and I believe requires further study. I just think it's a complete unfair characterization. Nevertheless, the telecommunication companies have done a remarkable job lobbying Congress, the federal and the state level, and our hands are largely tied. Nevertheless, I'm going to vote no. We were applauded earlier tonight for taking a stand against Fish and Wildlife and against DOE for what happened over at Rocky Flats. We've been applauded for taking a stand against oil and gas. I don't want to take a stand against big telecommunication companies, but I will take a stand against tying our hands from our ability to do our job, which is legislate locally. So I will vote no.
Okay,
so this problem has been years in the making. We've heard people consistently complaining about inadequate cell service from all major providers here in Superior. This is not just a Verizon problem. But Verizon is the most popular carrier, at least from my understanding of Superior residents, and it's certainly, personally I've seen problems with cell coverage here in Superior. I reached out to the community to get dialogue from the relevant Facebook groups, and it was overwhelming in terms of the people that have had problems with Superior. 9 to 1, people were unsatisfied, and the comments weren't just about the problem areas, but they were saying, all along Colorado, the only place that I'm having problem is in Superior, and that is it's unacceptable. It's just in this day and age, people need to have reliable coverage with their devices. When businesses are operating in town, they need to be able to process credit card transactions. When people are using their cell phones in their houses, they need to be able to have reliable, data traffic. They need to be able to have calls that aren't dropped. When people are traveling through town, they need to be able to handle calls. This is a solution that we did reach out to the town. Trustee Ryan, you may not recall, but we did have a discussion about it during a work session. There was an effort to reach out to all the carriers. Verizon answered the call, and we're delivering a solution here that is going to dramatically, I think, affect the quality of life for our residents, just in terms of their day-to-day operations. There's so little that we do that truly affects all of our residents on a day-to-day basis. This is one of those things that is really going to affect their day-to-day lives. And it's at no cost to the town, at no cost to the residents. Verizon is going to foot the bill for all of this. They're going to pay annual fees to the town for the licenses to do so. And we've got the appropriate oversight from the town in terms of reviewing the process and ensuring that design standards are adhered to, that a priority schedule is adhered to, and frankly, I hear your concerns. If we do not pass this license agreement, we just enacted an ordinance that we've heard essentially gives the carriers the right to do this anyway, and by passing an ordinance and then not passing a license, we're actually cutting off our nose to spite our face. We're not equipping ourselves with any additional capabilities to, protect what we, care about in terms of like the aesthetics of the community, in terms of a review process. So I think that this license agreement is benefiting us way more than it's hurting us. And that's, independent of just, the quality of life upgrade that the community is going to receive. So I give tremendous kudos to staff in terms of reaching out to all the carriers, to dealing with Verizon. Kudos to Kendra and your team for negotiating the license agreement and drafting the ordinance. Thank you, Debbie and Verizon, for coming here multiple times to present, to educate us, and I'm going to be voting to support the license agreement.
Okay, thanks, Mark. Ken?
So on the whole, I still think that this agreement and the ordinance we just passed is going to benefit the residents of Superior. Having reliable communication coverage is not just a luxury so we can talk to our friends and our family, but it's an emergency issue as well. When you're at your home and you have somebody who is having a heart attack and you can't get through because you have bad coverage, that's a health issue. I'm happy that we're moving forward with this. I will agree with Trustee Ryan's comments. It is frustrating how little flexibility we have in being able to actually regulate and move forward in this process in the way we see best fit for our residents. Personally, I think it's frustrating that we are only able to charge $200 per year with the 1% increment each year on top of that, when there's clearly much more value than that, but this has been dictated to us by federal and state law. One of the most important things that is incumbent upon us as elected officials is to be good stewards of the taxpayer dollars. I think it's important to take stands when we can, but my biggest concern is not to put us into unnecessary litigation risk. Just with oil and gas, where we move forward and we try to work with the legislature to impart better legislative controls for local use, that's a path I see we could do if we cared so much, but saying no, I don't think is worth it, and I think it gives us too much liability from a legal perspective. I will be supporting this MLA tonight.
Thanks, Ken. Anyone else? Neil?
Thanks. Full transparency, I've been on T-Mobile for the past year, and I was on Sprint for the 3 years preceding that. For the most part, my service has actually been pretty good. Before I dive in, I should note that I'm generally in favor of the MLA. I don't like that we need it, but the reality is that Verizon or any other carrier is within their own rights to do whatever they want by virtue of the FCC. The carriers don't need the MLA, the town does. If Verizon's penetration is anything close to Louisville, then I'm really not surprised they're having the problems that they are. Clearly, the dominant carrier is having issues with the lack of vertical assets and is making a bad situation, the lack of vertical assets is making a bad situation relatively difficult due to our town's geography and topology. And if I didn't mention it before, I do appreciate that Verizon is here and ready to work with the town on the infill build-out. As with any other extremely well-capitalized vendor, though, I expect that they will get a sizable first-mover advantage here, and if they are smart, they will lock up every single Excel light pole throughout town. My fear is on what comes next and how well future-proof this MLA actually really is. The reality is that our wonderful FCC has literally tied our hands on what we are allowed to push back on. I hope all the carriers realize that we are a planned community and we spend an inordinate amount of time discussing view corridors and building heights. We ask that Verizon adhere to the same principle as our residential developers are obligated to. But I also call upon our residents to take up the charge. We live in a time where bad press has far greater impact than bad legislation. I ask our residents to document and post examples of where any carrier is pushing the boundary of what is acceptable on Facebook, Instagram, or whatever. That's all I got.
Okay, thanks, Neil. Anyone else? Laura?
So first, just in the spirit of transparency, I'd like to clarify I am a Verizon customer, have been for about 20 years, and I'm really grateful that Verizon has taken the time to come twice to our board. I do have concerns about how we're moving forward with Verizon and no other carriers, but I see that as really falling on the other carriers. Our town staff has said they've reached out to them. They haven't been interested in coming forward with solutions. So I think that's a disappointment, but that's certainly not Verizon's fault. I'm also really share the concerns of my fellow trustees, and that I'm really disappointed we don't have flexibility in how we implement this. I'm disappointed we couldn't get some additional clauses added, like I noted, but I understand our hands are tied. I do, though, see this as a necessity for our town. Superior is a thriving, affluent town whose citizens likely have a higher use of technology than some other communities, whether that's cellular, internet bandwidth, or even Internet of Things networks. I think this is absolutely a necessity for us. We need it in order for our town to thrive. So I will be voting yes on this today.
Okay, thanks, Laura. Sandy, you?
I guess I need to disclose that I'm not a Verizon customer. And the piece that has me frustrated in all of this is that we have come to the point where we have to ask a profit-making business to come in and solve a problem with its customers. When I moved into Superior, I won't use cell phone service. I'll use another service. I'll use cable television or bringing television into my home. I didn't really want to use Comcast, so I tried using a satellite dish. The problem was the satellite dish couldn't be installed on my house. So we figured out a way to put it on there, and then of course the rules changed in my community and I had to change it. For me, this is an issue of competitive, it's a competition. Verizon doesn't work, then try Sprint, try AT&T. I have AT&T and I have absolutely no problem with my cell service anywhere in this community. Now, I'm not gonna say I don't have trouble up by the airport, because I do. But for me, it really bothers me that we're backed into a corner where we have to start striking an agreement with a business that can pretty much come in and do what it wants anyway, so they solve a competitive issue that they are not able to provide service to their town. I am personally very torn on whether to agree to this MLA right now. I don't know whether I'm going to vote yes or no. I guess I got to make a decision real fast. But I really am disappointed that we have to have an agreement like this in order to have service like this provided adequately by a competitive company.
All right. I think everyone else is gone. I will close with my comments. I appreciate Verizon being here and for working with our staff for months. I have been a Verizon customer since I was merged into Verizon from Qwest when I was with Qwest Wireless and US West before that. So about 2 years ago, our ability to use phones in the house just flipped, and they became unusable. And we got a booster, and it works great. But it feels a little strange paying for a booster to enhance service that I'm paying for. And I've heard that story over and over and over again. And I think the only reason is that we've all just quadrupled our devices that use data, and we're using our devices differently than we used to use them. And that's put a huge strain on the system. So this, to me, is a way to provide benefits for our residents for the way that they are living their lives and are going to continue living their lives. And I do think Verizon's probably the predominant carrier in town, and I appreciate them being the responding to this need to improve service. So I'm looking forward to the improvements that will hopefully come from this new agreement. And I do think this agreement's the only way to go. It gives the town protections in a situation where we wouldn't have them otherwise. So I think it absolutely makes sense for the town, and I'll be supporting it. So thank you all. All right, with that, I'll call the question. Yes, that's a great point. Thank you. Is there anyone in the public that would like to make any public comment on this agenda item before we vote? Okay, seeing none, we'll proceed to call the question. we do have a,
Motion's
yes,
already on the stand.
yes, we do have a motion. We have a second. All those in favor? All right, we have Lish, Skwajenski, Folsom, Lasis, Shaw, and Hammerly. Opposed? I'm sorry, opposed is Hammerly, and Ryan is opposed. All right, so motion passes. Thank you.
Thank you.
All right. Is the board good for this next agenda item? Okay. All right, we're on to item number 5, which is adoption of a resolution approving an agreement with ABC ×2 LLC for aviation consulting services.
Thank you, Mayor. Yep, tonight's agreement is with ABC X2 Aviation Consulting Services related to the Rocky Mountain Metropolitan Airport, with proposals to work with airport staff, the FAA, and the tower to create noise mitigation solutions for our town. Tasks that have been identified since the board's last discussion last year, I think it was, that we've worked with the consultant on are to identify and establish initial communications with airport stakeholders, including airport staff, flight schools, airport tenants, the FAA, and air traffic control personnel, including an assessment of baseline conditions, including a review of the airport facilities, airspace, traffic patterns, flight procedures, fleet mix, current noise abatement programs, and land use zoning around the airport in proximity to dominant flight corridors, and provide a summary of these findings. Second task will be to work in cooperation with airport stakeholders to implement realistic noise abatement solutions with initial prioritization focusing on flight schools operating out of the airport. And the third task will be to provide technical support and ongoing engagement with these airport stakeholders to ensure success. Contractors are going to be working on behalf of the town as well as the city of Louisville, advocating for the interests of our community as subject matters experts. It's a not to exceed amount of $30,000. The city of Louisville has agreed to partner with us in this agreement and on these tasks, and a 50-50 cost sharing. So town's portion of this agreement would be $15,000. The city council for Louisville approved it at their February 19th meeting, which was last week, on their consent agenda. And we have Jim Allardyce and Jason Schwartz with ABC here to maybe give a brief introduction again on your company and where things you've initially started, and then answer any questions that the board might have. All right. Thanks, Jim.
Hi, Jim Allardyce, ABCX2. Thanks for having us back. Over the last several weeks since we were last before you, we have reached out to the airport. We have had actually 3 meetings with them now. Our first meeting was with Paul Anslow, the airport director, and his staff. It was a very amicable meeting. They seemed interested in moving forward with the agendas that we had talked about, just very generally, which Manager Magley just went through. And subsequent to that meeting, we agreed that we would come back and he would bring together the tenants of the airport. So we had fixed base operators there. We had flight schools represented there. We had some other airport tenants there. The air traffic control tower was present in the airport and their staff. They even had some AOPA members, Aircraft Owners and Pilots Association members there. At that meeting, it was just kind of a brainstorming session where we just kind of threw ideas against the wall to see what would stick. One of the things that we kind of agreed to in that meeting was that we would form a task group to actually take a look at those ideas and figure out which ones were low-hanging fruit, something that we could implement fairly quickly. As Jason characterizes it, the green items, the yellow items, and the red items. So there was a few things I think that they put forward out there that probably aren't doable or aren't reasonable. I would characterize the yellow items as things that are probably doable but may cost some money and take a lot of time or more time. And the green items would be what I would characterize as the low-hanging fruit. The things that we could implement relatively quickly. As you know, anything that involves any kind of regulation or standardization or, anything to do with airplanes, really, there's always a safety aspect to it that you have to consider before you just go willy-nilly making changes. And the tower has already expressed that, we would have to do some kind of analysis on any kind of a change just to make sure that, it still meets standardization in the NAS, National Airspace System, and, it doesn't compromise safety in any way. And yet still allows the airport to grow in a sustainable way where that they could consider the impacts to the surrounding communities. So then we had a meeting today, which was just basically a meet and greet for the town of Superior and the city of Louisville. Good Lord, man, I'm going to get those right one of these days. And it was a very amicable meeting, I think. And I think that Manager Magley was there, and I think he would attest that Mr. Anslow seemed very proactive in how he wanted to approach noise mitigation, flight quiet programs, those types of things, and to ensure that the folks on the airport knew that there was a noise abatement program at the airport and that there would be things going forward that we could do to enhance that. So in a nutshell, that's kind of where we are and what we've done so far.
Okay, thank you very much for that update.
Sir.
Questions on the board? Ken?
Before we move forward, are we doing questions? I've got some questions about the contract. Questions for staff as well, or are we going to do phases? Okay. And also, thank you very much. Appreciate you guys continuing with your work and coming back.
Yes, sir.
So my recollection of where we left it last was that we were going to try to come back with a agreement A that brought in more stakeholders, which it did, and I fully appreciate you guys doing that. But second, that not only would we have the tasks broken out like they are, but that we'd be associating dollar amounts with the tasks in a firm fixed price manner rather than a time and materials manner. Was there an attempt at that? Is there
Yeah, I remember that conversation. Matt, you're fine. Oh, sorry. I remember that conversation about associated with each task so that the board could have check-ins.
Mm-hmm.
We didn't implement those in this agreement.
So my concern is clearly there's all these different contracting vehicles, time and materials puts the most risk on us, the town, versus say a firm fixed price, which puts the majority of the risk on the contractor. There are these check-ins involved. I suppose, let's say we get to the point that for task 1, it takes considerably longer, task 2 takes considerably longer, and we get through the entire $30,000. I didn't see a stipulation within the contract. Does that mean that our ceiling either needs to be raised or we just don't get the ultimate deliverables we were looking for? Or can we add some type of stipulation that the tasks that are outlined will still be delivered, but the maximum price is $30,000?
Yeah, I think we feel comfortable in talking with Jim and Jason that we will be able to complete these tasks within this contract amount. We haven't had a discussion about deliverables if we reach that $30,000 figure. And now we would have to involve the city of Louisville as well.
Right.
And whether we come back to the town board and the city council at that time, discuss whether additional funds are needed or if ABC would complete their services based on the $30,000.
Okay. As far as the way the tasks are presented, in the way I'm reading it, they're basically check-in points Matt, in your mind, is that something that it comes back to the board each time, or you are just going to give us updates? Those are check-ins for staff. Can you explain that a bit?
Right. The plan
deeper?
was not only updates for the board, but for the community as well. And we talked about that today, about various ways to get information out to the community, which is going to be important, whether it's through our website, social media, whatever it might be, community meetings. So the plan was for updates to the board and the community happening for each task.
Okay.
And more often if needed.
Yeah. Kendra, we heard a concern from a resident earlier this evening about singling out flight schools for possible discrimination issues. Do you have concerns about that comment?
I don't have enough background on that to know whether that's a valid concern or not at this point. I would have to look into it.
So without knowing the answer, would it be your counsel not to move forward with an approval tonight until we know whether we're getting ourselves into any type of legal liability by naming flight schools specifically?
I don't think this wouldn't create any liability under this contract, no. So I wouldn't suggest that we need any amendment to this contract.
Okay.
Yeah, I was going to say that may be, in my opinion, a bit of a mischaracterization. You know, it's not concentrated solely on the flight schools and this is going to apply only to you and nobody else. That's not the idea. The biggest idea of the meeting that we had the other day and of the flight school representation on the task force is to draw their ideas out from them, not to be overly restrictive or discriminatory against them. They just happen to be, you know, some of the biggest participants there at the airport. So we wanted to get their ideas about, hey, do you all have any suggestions about how we can go about mitigating this noise? One of the things that we try to do anywhere that we go in is draw out the tenants and make it their idea. You know, we facilitate that type of an environment with them rather than me coming from Atlanta and saying, hey, I'm here to help, you know, and fix all your problems, because that doesn't usually work very well. You know, it works better if you kind of, the Socratic method of teaching, you know, and draw out their ideas and their concerns and try to guide them towards where we want them to go. And that's kind of the approach that we've tried to take with the airport. So I don't think we're singling out the flight schools per se.
Yeah, and personally, I'm not all that concerned about it either, but not being an expert in the area, just want to make sure we had the expert's opinion.
Understood. I do believe that the language of the agreement doesn't state that they will be discriminating. It
just they'll be starting.
Right. It talks about involving various working groups, including flight schools. And I think the prioritization is to focus on the flight schools, but again, in cooperation with the flight schools, not to regulate the flight schools. So I don't want to put words in your mouth, but.
And the characterization that we got initially was the issue is touch and goes.
Right.
Okay, that's not just flight schools. That's other users of the airport as well. The flight schools just happen to be the biggest users of touch and goes.
Yeah.
So, I mean, we try to characterize it by the issue, not by who's doing it.
If you're willing, are you able to speak to what your contracts similar to this normally look like? Are they always time and material, or do you?
Sure. So that's always a big question, is what does this animal look like? And unfortunately, contracts like this are relationship based.
Yeah.
And you have to go in, you have to establish trust, you have to get ideas, and then it depends on what ideas that you decide to go forth and implement as to how much time it takes and what regulations have to be considered and all that kind of thing. So it is very difficult, you know, right up front to say, we will get this done in this amount of time for this amount of money. It's very, very difficult to do that. I will say this, ABCX2 does not nickel and dime our clients, we don't. One of the things that we absolutely don't like is to be the long pole in the tent. So when it's our turn to get something done, we try to get it done expeditiously and frugally, and get the process moved forward. Now, that doesn't mean that the other entities that we're working with are as enthusiastic to get things done as we are.
Right.
So, but, you know, say for instance, you know, we go through this task group and we come up with 2 or 3, 4 things that we think are implementable, and we try to put together a schedule, time frame to move forward. That doesn't mean from the time that happens until the time the next meeting or next thing that you guys are getting charged. If we're waiting on them, you guys aren't getting charged.
Right.
So, I mean, it's not like we have a weekly or monthly quota that we charge you guys. It's actual. If we work, we bill. If we don't, we don't. So, and we try to be frugal with that. So, for whatever that's worth to you.
I appreciate that.
Yes, sir.
What type of time frame are you looking at from where we are now to the end of the final task that's outlined here?
So I think, first of all, in the short term, within the next couple of weeks, we'll have our report put together from everything that we've done to date. And we'll give that to that task group. That will include the suggestions that were from the meeting and a few more that we're going to add to that for the task group to consider. We believe within about a month after that should be a good time frame where we will have had time to interact with telecons and emails and stuff like that to be able to get some idea of when we're going to have the final implementation meeting. Then we'd have to schedule it after that. So I'm thinking, 4 to 6 weeks, we should be well on our way to getting that initial, task group thing done. Yeah. So. Okay.
And then my final question for now is just clarification on what's listed as the rates within the agreement. We have 3 bullet points. The first is a base rate, and then there's 2 other rates in air traffic modeling and procedure design, and then in noise and environment modeling. So let's say you're doing air traffic modeling and procedure design. Is that on top of your base rate? So $450, or is it?
No, it would be in lieu of.
Okay.
Yes, sir. And just FYI, today, all we've been charging is the base rate. So, because really actually the tasking that we have so far probably is not going to touch either one of those other 2 because we're not actually doing procedure design. If we get down the road after, this first tasking is done and y'all say, well, yeah, you guys are doing good, we want you to continue, and there is procedure design of instrument procedures out of the airport that they want to go forward with, that's when we would get into the higher rates and the modeling rates. Yes,
Okay.
sir.
Kendra, in your opinion, is it clear in the agreement that they're all separate rates and the base isn't going to be, the other rates wouldn't be added on to the base?
Yes.
Okay.
So I have a question about the meet and greet meeting that you held today.
Yes, ma'am.
Who was in that meeting? Was it just Town of Superior, Town of Louisville? Were there citizens involved?
No, ma'am. It was just Manager Magley, the manager and assistant manager of the city of Louisville.
Yeah.
There was the airport director, Mr. Anslow, the tower manager, Shoal Burton, and then Ben.
Ben, yeah.
Yeah, which is one of the airport staff.
Okay, so part of the reason I ask is because in the contract, I noticed that phase 3 includes creating a citizen working group.
Yes, ma'am.
I'm really surprised that would be left until the end versus up front as part of the current state assessment. We have a lot of citizens who have done just a lot of due diligence figuring out, when the noise is happening, what's going on. I'd really like to see them involved sooner rather than later. To me, it's problematic if you develop the solution and then form a citizens working group. I mean, what are they going to do at that point? So is that something that we can move up to one of the early phases?
Yes, ma'am. Absolutely. I do know that we have had interaction with some of your citizens already via email and personal meetings with them. So we have not neglected input from some of the people that actually have some of the best background and knowledge and stuff like that.
So what would be the intent of forming the citizens working group after the solution has already been designed?
I think what you want to do is you want to have ongoing interaction with the airport. And the idea was to establish a rapport and a working relationship with the airport. And then you have, like I said, the low-hanging fruit kind of thing. I think we have the expertise and the knowledge available to be able to accomplish those things. I think the longer term solutions and dealing with the proposed growth of the airport and the impacts to the community, that's where you really need to actually have the input from the town and from the citizens to decide what's the best way to go forward there. Jason does a lot of community outreach and engagement, communication with the media, social media, and interaction with we talked about like a community roundtable type thing. So that's fine. I think, like I said, in the short term, I believe that there's the low-hanging fruit things are things that we know just from our experience in the industry that can be done.
So with these low-hanging fruit, another thing I noticed is that in your phase 1 baseline assessment, the contract at least doesn't mention any kind of measuring of the noise. That's something I really want to see spelled out in the contract, that you will measure the noise now, give us an estimate of whether it's for the low-hanging fruit, the middle, or the high end. What do you expect the decrease to be, so that then once it's actually in place, we can say, yes, we got that, or no, we didn't, we still have a ways to go.
Okay.
Is that something we can add?
I'm going to let Jason talk about that, because he is the noise guru. So
it's a good question. Noise monitoring isn't something that we scoped in this. Noise monitoring would require a whole new level of investment and a larger team. It's something we can explore with staff if you want us to pursue that. But we've been focusing more on operations. So how many times, say in Rock Creek, are residents seeing an aircraft in touch and go patterns? Can we work with the flight school to change those patterns so that we don't have this constant merry-go-round effect?
Got it. So just a different metric. That makes sense.
Yeah, it's more operational than, and part of the reason for that is because a lot of times you find that the noise level is relatively low. People are still angry about it. So I tend not to focus on the decibel level, which may or may not change, or may not change very perceptively, even if the aircraft are, there's less of them, but you'll definitely notice if, there's not what we're being told, a plane every couple of minutes over my house on a sunny day, that kind of thing. That's what we're kind of shooting for right now.
Okay. So with that in mind, completely understand that there's different metrics beyond the noise. I would like to see us put something around the success metrics into the implementation. I think it will be really important that we see what was the before, what was the after, for any kind of contract like this. Is that a possibility to add in the implementation phase?
What exactly is the matrix you're looking for?
Just something around success metrics. So some of the metrics that were just mentioned around number of times a plane is flying overhead or patterns that are being flown, just something so that we can actually see a measurable difference.
I think if we're going to make changes to the scope, we probably are going to need to bring this back. I'm not going to be able to draft this right now.
Yep.
Okay.
That's up to the board. I'm just saying, I don't think I want to be drafting changes to the scope on the fly. I think I need to talk to these guys offline and figure out the right language to use, the right terms to use, those kind of things. So maybe you could sort of give us a list of what the board would like to see, and then we will work on the best way to phrase that. That would be my suggestion.
So Patrick Hammertown staff, one of the conversations we had earlier is just wanting to make sure that the board is aware that, we're largely reliant on other players and their willingness to buy into this. So I do think that we could probably come up with some measurables, but this isn't something that we could forcibly make somebody to do. So as long as there's that kind of general understanding, I think our plan was to work with these guys to say, what are the things that we can implement now that are agreeable to you, that are agreeable to us, and we're going to strongly encourage them as much as possible to implement, but ultimately we're not the one that has the teeth behind it. So I think, we could probably work on that wording as long as everybody's aware, that this is largely voluntary on their part.
And the other thing to keep in mind is Louisville's already approved it as written. So if we make changes, it's got to go back to Louisville for another approval.
Wouldn't it be possible, though, to have the metrics to be part of the implementation, rather than it be metrics that we're gonna put into the contract, but that the implementation phase would actually talk about metrics that we agreed upon, for example, with the flight schools, that they will work to do these things. And then those are the kinds of things that we can communicate to the community that the flight schools have agreed to work, or general aviation or whatever it might be. Things that, those would be metrics that we could communicate to our residents that we're going to be working on, as opposed to trying to actually put those in the agreement.
Yeah, again, and I don't want this to sound like a cop-out or anything, but the issue when you get into a situation like we have here with the town and with the airport, there are things that can be done. Right now, we're at a disadvantage because we don't know what those things are that they will accept to be done. Does that make sense? So we've had, probably 9 or 10 different ideas that came out of that brainstorming session the other day. Probably half a dozen of them or so would go forward into that task group, and maybe a couple more that Jason would put in there. What comes out the other end, the things that the people are agreeable, or the airport is agreeable to implement, and the tower is agreeable to implement, at that time, then we would know what the metric was. It's kind of a backwards way of backing into that to the metrics. But as Patrick said, unfortunately, we really have no power in this. What we have is the ability to have influence. And so we're going to try to use that influence to achieve positive results for you all. We can check in with you as often as you like via email or phone call, because I'm sure you don't want to fly us out here every month to hammer this thing out. All I can say is we'll work closely with you and with the staff to make sure that we're communicating fully those things, those activities that we're taking toward the ultimate goal of mitigating the noise in the town. So it's just an ambiguous beast that you work with when you're working with the airport and the tower and those entities. So
I have a couple of questions. One, Patrick, maybe there's a question for you. I know there was investigation into other communities funding this, and in the memo, town said no. I want to talk about Broomfield specifically. Mm-hmm. Who was asked at Broomfield?
That was me. My communication was with the city and county manager.
Okay. So local and state taxes linked to the operation of the airport. So I'm going to assume local taxes are about 2/3 of the total taxes that Broomfield benefits from. $12.7 million. So Broomfield likely benefits about, I'll be conservative, minimum $6 million, maybe as much as $9 million. They said no to splitting this statement of work for $10,000, $15,000. The town manager.
City and county manager, yes.
Said no.
That's correct. I also reached out to Jefferson County.
Right.
Jefferson County has the authority over the airport.
Right, I understand, right. Rocky Mountain Economic Contribution to the communities it serves, certainly includes Jefferson County, $460 million in output, 2,670 jobs, with an annual payroll of $154 million. It's a lot of money. I want to talk about the measurement and monitoring. So I'm going to sort of preview. I have a lot of thoughts about this. I think this is really important, necessary work. I think the scope of work is woefully undeveloped. I think it's a, I don't want to be negative on it, but a consultant, feel good, run some meetings, $30,000 statement of work, right? If we're going to do this, this should be done big. If it's done, because doing it big, one thing you have to do, you have to monitor. I work in healthcare. You cannot, we can't, I think a lot about how to change a physician behavior. The best way to change a physician behavior is to tell them how they're doing against their peers, right? We have to tell the airport what we are observing. We have to provide some monitoring. One of our citizens dug through the website, and 99% of flight schools are flying over the town of Superior. Now I know that they have a lot of different choices, and maybe the safest route is over Superior, but I'm not convinced that 99% of the time the safest route is over Superior. That's a perfect example of something that I would want to be monitored and then shown back to the flight schools, and things that are monitored improve without exception. So the scope of work, I don't have any problem with the scope of work because it is what it is. I don't want to pay for it. I'm disgusted that the city and county of Broomfield are not contributing. And I think this is very important work that needs to be done a lot bigger. I'm not convinced that we need to do the work. I'll pay my fair share, this town's fair share, but this I don't think is going to have, save my comments. But those are my question was, how do we go after Broomfield? And I'll support some colleagues around the importance of monitoring, because the ultimate goal is to improve behavior. You can't improve behavior without monitoring. It just doesn't work.
Yeah, well, I was just going to say, one thing, when we first started the dialogue with the town, we were trying to actually keep costs low. And one of the things that we actually do is we have information dashboards. That requires a sensor up at the airport that we put in, plus we have FAA data that we mix in with that. And we could give you guys one of the information dashboards, and that would provide metrics over time so that you could actually see improvement. So it's not a full ANOM system like what they have at some of the bigger airports and stuff like that. It's, that's noise sensors out there and a lot of different data points. But it's kind of a low cost aircraft tracking mechanism where you would have the ability to go back and look at historical data, and you would be able to see if there was changes in the operation based on the discussion that we had over time and the implementations that they did. I think that's reasonable. The sensors that we provide would be best placed on the airport. So we would have to try to get the flight schools or the airport to actually host those sensors. And then additional FAA data that we get goes into that. Then there's a subscription rate for that. But we didn't really put that forth because we, like I said, we're trying to keep the cost low. So, but it's an option, and it's something that's measurable.
Okay, others?
After you. All right. Just a couple of quick questions, and I appreciate you guys coming back here because, when you're here in December or November, we kind of told you to just scale it down because we didn't think we thought we'd be the only ones paying for it. And lo and behold, Louisville came in, and, Trustee Hammerly and I had a great conversation with them last week because they see that their citizens, this is a big issue for them. And the fact that you guys have already met with them, I think that's great. And Councilwoman Stoltzman actually said something interesting in terms of why she thought Broomfield and Westminster weren't interested is that, because of their large towns and cities, they just don't care as much. They don't think they have as much of an ability to change things. Their transient populations are, lower they haven't been in their homes as long. So, and I think one of the things that you're struggling with here is the scope of work has sort of been de-scoped because that's what we told you to do. We told you to de-scope it because we don't control the airport. We sit next to it, and they fly over us. And you're doing, I think, the scope of work, given the nebulous nature of what you're working on with the FAA, again, another, regulatory body, which we don't vote for, we don't influence, they get to dictate what they do over us. You're trying to work with them as best you can, and I appreciate that. The one question I have after all that is, in the 2 conversations you've had with the airport director, Anselo, he has a budget. The airport down at Centennial has very proactively worked with its community. It has paid for citizen roundtables. It has paid for a number of noise mitigation issues. Has Director Anselo expressed any interest in paying a single cent towards, his airport?
I've talked to Paul Anselo about this and requested that they participate in the cost sharing of this agreement. His response was he was willing to, it has to go to the Jefferson County Commissioners for approval, was his response. Plus he, instead of committing dollars, he was committing his staff time and resources to work with us on coming up with noise mitigation solutions to be a good neighbor.
It's a first step. I think we're going to have difficulty here because you're going to give us, a fair amount of work, or you're going to put in a fair amount of work, and we don't control the airport. We share about 18 inches of county line with Jefferson County. Actually, it's probably more, but they really don't have to listen to a damn thing that ultimately we put out there. I'm really dissatisfied with that, but I do appreciate everything you're doing. I absolutely think we have to do it. I think we should have done this years ago. The airport has gone up in volume, in the last 4 years. I think just this summer, Anselo was harping on the fact they've had 12% annual growth for the last 5 years. That's insane, without even reaching out to the town. But the fact that you've already met with him and he's shown some interest and he's dedicating staff time, I think is a start. And it's a capability that you're bringing here that our staff doesn't have, and we're absolutely, I think, in need of it.
Yes, sir. And like I said before, I think a few months ago they weren't even talking about it, and now they're talking about it. That's progress. I mean, it's may not be a metric that is measurable, but it's progress to actually go in there and have the airport director going, we want to make sure that we, everybody knows about this noise program, and we want to make sure that we put, the information out and we get some tangible things going. That's progress over just ignoring, what the impacts of the city were. The other piece I just want to say, you sort of related to the economics of what's going on. One of the buzzwords, I guess, we look for is sustainable growth. One of the things about sustainable growth is having the communities that actually bear the brunt of the impact also reap some of the benefits of the airport as well. That would be a long-term goal with sustainable growth of the airport, to actually have the city actually reap some benefits from that, the airport master planning and things going forward. So, and Jason can talk more about that because he knows exactly how that works. But, this is, like you said, we de-scoped a lot. We actually do strategic plans, and it's much bigger, much more involved. We can do one of those for y'all if you want. I feel kind of caught between a rock and a hard place here because it's like we're trying to do what you're asking us to do, and then it's inadequate.
I want you to do it for free.
Yeah, and it's inadequate, and I don't want to be. I definitely don't want to be inadequate. So it's we want to do what you want us to do.
Yeah. Sir. So again, Patrick Hammer, town staff, and because I had the fun task of trying to de-scope the scope and meet the timeline of having. Because what we also heard is that we wanted immediate action. What I do want to point out is you know, I think what we're given with this scope is, I think we'd walk away with knowing what's actually causing the noise and when through the analysis that could go on, and then a list of realistic solutions that they're agreeing to. So when we de-scoped, we were actually fairly diligent in trying to say, what can we get out of this that's the most bang for the buck if it needed to carry on. We know that we're going to need the baseline assessment no matter what, because there is still some level of question on what's actually causing the noise up there. So that piece of it, and then the low-hanging fruit, which these guys are continuing to hit upon, is actually something that we've probably pumped down their throats a little bit more than they have wanted, in saying, what are the most realistic things that we can agree to, or issues now from both sides, and what can we do right now to stop those things? So I do understand your frustration. They do have the ability to offer a whole heck of a lot more. We were trying to meet that timeline on having something tangible, maybe by this summer. I heard a lot when we presented, I don't want to go another summer on my porch and hear this. I don't want to sit on my balcony and hear planes this summer. We need staff to get on it. But I do think that there is some validity in doing the baseline assessment and understanding what are the traffic issues. And I think that what we're already starting to find is the noise complaints we're receiving from South Rock Creek are different than North Rock Creek, which are different than Louisville. So maybe in some sense this is a jumping off point. And if there's opportunities to add, maybe this could act as a check-in, or we scale back those hours. This initially started with these guys. I told them to work in $10,000 increments and then check with me. So I don't know if that helps the situation at all. But I do think that these kind of 3 bullet point deliverables fold well into something bigger if we want to go that route. But I do think that, and we've got some public here that we've worked with, we're hearing a lot of needing that baseline assessment on what the actual root of the noise is. Is it touch and goes? Is it jets? Is it helicopters? So that's kind of what I've asked these guys to kind of keep in their back pocket. And the de-scoping was something we tried to work on to make sure there was actionable items this summer.
Okay. Mark and then Sandy.
So thank you, Jim and Jason, for coming back to town again and for your efforts to address our citizens' concerns. And I applaud you for being proactive and actually reaching out to the airport director already, having meetings with tower operators and FBOs and other stakeholders. This is a big problem, big challenge for the community. I've got young boys in my house, so when they see an F-16 take off or the firefighting tankers, they think it's really cool. But I certainly appreciate the noise that is generated and the concern. That is a totally legitimate concern in the public, and I'm looking forward to hearing from the public tonight in terms of public comment. My concern right now is just in terms of, I'm a lawyer, I read contracts, and when I read contracts, I'm trying to understand, what do they mean? What are we getting? What are the obligations of the contracting parties, just so there's no misunderstanding anywhere down the line. So we talk a lot about airport stakeholders. What is a stakeholder in your opinion, and how many stakeholders are there?
So when we put together the scopes, a stakeholder is really anybody who has a stake. So a resident who's impacted negatively or positively, any tenant, any user, regulators, the town. It's really anybody with a stake in that particular situation or entity. We keep that very broad. That's kind of why we use that term. We don't select who the stakeholders are, the stakeholders do. So if a resident or a bunch of residents are telling us the airport's impacting us, they're a stakeholder.
So the airport itself, a flight school, an individual resident in Superior are all equal stakeholders. They're stakeholders. They may not necessarily have the same weight, but they're stakeholders.
Yeah.
Okay. With respect to flight schools that are operating out of the airport, how many flight schools are there? Do you guys know that yet?
4, I think, right? I think there's 4.
And do you know approximately, and maybe you haven't undergone, this level of kind of study about the operations of the airport, but what percentage of the flights originating out of the airport are attributable to flight school traffic? Do you know?
Yeah, we haven't gotten into that'd be part of our baselining. We haven't, from talking to the airport, it sounds like I would guess that the majority of operations are related to flight school activity or training. So it could be visiting pilots that are coming in from other airports, but we haven't gone through the numbers yet.
Okay. And then, I'll echo kind of the concerns about noise monitoring and, I think it's an interesting, question, and it hasn't been necessarily something that I thought of or appreciated until tonight. But, volume is one thing, noise is another. My understanding is that the concern from the residents isn't, just observing all the planes. It's hearing all the planes. It's the noise that they're concerning. So I think first and foremost, in terms of, crafting a plan, it needs to have, noise at the forefront of any plan to address it. Because I don't think people really care about the visual, the shadow that's cast over Rock Creek for 30 seconds as a plane's going over. They care about the noise that's emanating from the flights that are taking off and the traffic that's about to land. And I think, monitoring is part and parcel to that. If you're looking at the noise that's increasing over time or decreasing over time, it's really hard to judge anything without, metrics to monitor. And I understand and appreciate that that's going to cost additional money, but it just seems like that would be a necessary cost, in my opinion. One question that I had just about the contract. So in terms of the work plan, so you had the phases, phase 1, phase 2, phase 3. Phase 2 says strategy development. Phase 2 shall involve working in cooperation with airport stakeholders to implement realistic noise abatement solutions with initial prioritization focusing on flight schools operating out of the airport. Contractors shall help broker solutions that meet industry needs, are consistent with regulatory limitations, and help protect and enhance the local quality of life. So I'm really struggling with how does anybody measure whether phase 2 has been achieved, whether it's been successful. It seems like it depends upon cooperation with airport stakeholders. How many? Who? And I understand that, this is one of the challenges with this project because we don't have the ability to force the airport or its operators to do anything, right? So it's all entirely dependent upon obtaining cooperation. And not only cooperation, but cooperation with the people that we need to get them to cooperate. So, what if we can't? And why should they cooperate? I mean, I'm sure you guys have thought about these things, and these are challenges that you're dealing with. But, if I'm thinking of, the perspective of those stakeholders, if I was a flight school and somebody said, hey, it would be really nice if you would stop flying over the residential neighborhood so much because the neighbors are angry, and I don't have any obligation under the FAA or, the master plan for the airport, I could understand being kind and compassionate and considerate of neighbors. But what if they're not kind, compassionate, and considerate? And they just say, well, thanks, but no thanks. I'm going to just carry on carrying on. So, that's a concern. And, I guess the last two questions, that I'll turn it back over to you is, how confident are you in your ability to obtain cooperation, and what's in it for them?
Okay, so the monitoring question is a great one. And we can work with you guys, or we can work with staff and come up with a proposal. There's two ways really to monitor the outcomes of the work that we're doing. You could do, the acoustic would be monitoring, which I could tell you would be very expensive. We can bring in that capability, but that typically means bringing in portable equipment, microphones, setting them up in an array in a large area, and then have somebody here on the ground care and feeding them for probably a month, at least a week or two, of pre-implementation testing. So we've got somebody here for 2 weeks, setting up the monitors, downloading all the data, that kind of thing. And then a post. So once everything's done, or however much of it is done that you say, okay, we want you to monitor. Again, it's just very, very expensive, and we can do that. But the cost sensitivity that we've heard from staff is kind of why we're like, okay, how can we monitor outside of something that would be super expensive? So what we've been doing is looking at flight tracking technology that's already out there. In fact, we were talking to one of the residents that told us she's also discovered some tools. And as Jim mentioned, there's the dashboards that we work on where we can bring in sensing technology that can see or senses the aircraft, combine that with FAA flight tracking data. And then what we can do is, and I've actually been testing some of this not with equipment on the field, but other equipment that other vendors have out there. And I've actually taken video of long periods of time watching the traffic, especially closed traffic, touch and goes, which seem to be one of the biggest sources of frustration. And I've been able to witness and really visualize the patterns. So here's the pattern today, and you can see in some cases right over Rock Creek where we're hearing. So what I would propose to you is I could show you that. Here's a 3 or 4 hours of this pattern, or a month, whatever you wanted. And then here's after we've done our work. And do you see a pattern difference? So you wouldn't be measuring the noise per se, but you would see, okay, the aircraft are no longer over my house, at least not at the frequency. I mean, we've said all along that we're trying to manage expectations. So for me to tell you that if we do our job 100%, you're never going to see an airplane over Superior would be disingenuous. I mean, I think you know that that's not going to happen, but we're definitely shooting for a reduction.
And so you already have access to the flight pattern information?
Kind of, yeah, not, I'd have to look to see how the fidelity is. It's free stuff that I found online right now, so I would have to check it and validate it against, maybe we could get data from FAA to make sure that it's valid and reliable enough. If not, we would look at FAA. The dashboards that Jim mentioned, it's a relatively low cost sensor, and then like he said, a subscription. That might be something the airport would purchase, but that would get us access and them to the data for the airport. We could do analyses like one of the concerns we've heard was runway use, and the runway that's being used is constantly the one that brings aircraft over Superior. So if one of the outcomes of the work was creating a preferred runway where whenever possible, use this runway because it's got less impact, that's the kind of data that we could capture. And then we could show you, okay, prior to the work, it was 80% on this runway, the Superior unfriendly runway. And then after the work, they've reduced it to whatever the new number is. And we do the same thing, meeting with the flight schools and talking to them about here's what we're seeing, can we do better? Okay. On the question about what if nobody wants to play ball, I think that's a valid question, and we've gone through the process very slowly and very deliberately. So when we met with the airport initially, Jim and I were like, I don't know what they're going to say. They might just say, get out, right? They didn't. But what we're doing and what we're trying to do is do things very incrementally. So if we found, that the airport just wouldn't talk to us at all and the FAA wouldn't talk to us at all, we would go back to staff and say, I don't think that we can really do anything to help you. So we wouldn't go through the contract and now you've written a check and then we'd say, by the way, there's nothing we can do here. So we're a really tiny company. What's there, 5 partners? I just joined them in January. That's just not how we do business. So we wouldn't, we're very, we operate with integrity. The reason I joined them is because I have a passion for helping communities. My old company was Aviation Compatibility Consulting, and all I did was help airports and communities coexist. And I do that because it's a passion, not because, paying the bills and the mortgage is great, but it's truly a passion. When we've worked with the airport and the meetings, like he mentioned with the flight schools, nobody in the room argued that we, meaning them, shouldn't participate and don't want to participate. They started generating ideas and strategies on how they can help themselves become a better neighbor. They acknowledged, we're part of this community. And the budget issue aside, and I share the frustrations that you guys have mentioned, that's not my area. I'm the ops noise guy. And from that perspective, everybody was very supportive and very I mean, I almost wish I had a recording of it because people really did express a commitment to wanting to be a better neighbor. A lot of times, believe it or not, pilots don't realize that people don't like the airplane noise. They don't get it. You know, I don't like race car noise. I used to live in Daytona Beach. I don't like motorcycle noise. Motorcycle drivers think it's great. So pilots just don't know. So part of this is an education. It's having them understand, hey, when you fly out there and you fly in this way or that way, you're really causing an interruption, a disruption on the ground, and impacting quality of life. So a lot of it's just, you know, I mean, people are generally not evil, right? So if you say, look, I know you like to fly, you're destroying my quality of life. If you just raise your altitude a little bit, or you fly over here and it's gonna be safe, I mean, why wouldn't they do that? So, you know, the approach we're taking is with the airport, we don't want to shut you down. We don't want you to do anything unsafe, but we've had enough experience working with airports and in aviation that we know that there's ways that you can operate, and you can do it in a way that you're not destroying the quality of life for the community surrounding the airport. So it's really win-win, and we haven't really gotten any pushback.
Oh, I do want to say that Jason, when we went over there, had like 12 slides selling them on why they should participate. We got through about 2 of them before they started jumping in with ideas and stuff. So it was actually pleasantly surprising that they jumped in that quickly. So it was pretty good. And he was bummed out that he didn't get to use all the slides.
And we're really, I'm not a legal person. I'm not a contracts person. That's Jim's job. I'm just the noise guy. And here too, we can be as flexible as you want as far as Jim talks about, what do you call them, checkpoints? Task orders. I mean, if you want to have minuscule task orders, you know, we can check in with staff as often as you want. And before they write another check or spend another dollar, they want to review what we've done. I mean, totally fine with that. We want to make you guys comfortable. I've worked for counties and for airports, and I've hired consultants, and I know the risks and the concerns. So we can put in as many task orders as you all want. The question about why we have the community engagement shifted to the bottom, I think that was a part of the scope changing, because mobilizing the community and getting a community-based working group together would take a lot of time, potentially. By me saying a lot, it's not necessarily a lot in your scheme of things, but it would take a flight out, it would take a few days, it would take meetings, and we're trying to keep the cost down. I would love to engage the community. We've had the luxury of working with a handful of residents. It's been awesome. It's been super helpful because we get the boots on the ground. You know, what are you actually experiencing? So, you know, I've tossed around ideas with Jim about social media, creating a web portal where the community can interact with us, but all of these things add to time and add to the budget. And so the only reason that that stakeholder engagement was in task 3 was budget constraints. And the other thing I'll say on that is the task can be done concurrently. So if you were to say, yeah, we want you to do task 1 and we want you to pull in the community engagement piece, that can be done concurrently, and really it should be. But breaking them up into tasks just gives you the opportunity to say, okay, we don't want you to do that yet. We want you to do this. Once we feel comfortable with what you've done, then we'll authorize you to do the next task. So it's really, we're trying to be responsive to what you guys want and what you're comfortable with.
So maybe I'm misunderstanding the contract, but my impression was that the contract was to do all 3 of these phases. Is that accurate? So as we're saying, we're shifting the community engagement to the end to save budget. How does that save budget? It still all needs to get done within the contract. Or are you saying that you're going to run out of budget and then come back to us?
No, I'm saying the tasking can be done it can be concurrent is what I'm saying. So if you wanted us to start the engagement at the top, that's something we can do.
I definitely think community engagement needs to be as part of that current state, not after we've already developed a solution. Otherwise, we're just having the community out there not having any input. But I do have another question though about the hours. So, I mean, as Ken pointed out, we're looking at 120 to 150 hours in there. So as we're looking across all 3 of those phases, how would you allocate the hours across those 3 phases? Because I'm a consultant myself, have been for 10 years. I'm really surprised that in 150 hours, you could even get a comprehensive current state done, let alone the remediation. So I'm really concerned about what what we're actually getting in that 150 hours. I would much rather be realistic and say we're only going to get a current state done and that's it. But I don't see how 150 hours we're going to get through 3 phases. That's 2 people, maybe a week and a half of time.
So I think probably what may be best is to, so it sounds like there's maybe a shift back towards a little bit more flexibility on timeline and budget, if I'm understanding correctly. And
well, I mean, none of us are experts in noise mitigation in airports.
Right.
So that's where I would really look to the consultants to say, this is what you need to do. I mean, I've had those conversations with my clients where they say, we want to get this done by summer, and I have to have a tough conversation and say, you can't get it done by summer if you actually want to get it done right. So that's where I'd look to you guys to tell us, you know, I'd rather know up front and be able to tell the community we can't get this done by summer than try to put in some light plan that doesn't really accomplish much.
Yeah. And sorry, go ahead.
I'd like to hear public comment, but I mean, from my perspective, I'm not interested in sending this back for more. We sent this back in December, and we're now, you know, going to be 2 or 3 more months. So I'm interested in passing this tonight and moving forward. I realize there's.
We didn't get the changes we asked for in December. We asked for details around hours, around timeline. We didn't get any of that.
Okay.
There's no more details in the contract than there were before.
Okay. So I guess before we start going down a different path, but are there additional, Sandy, you had, yeah.
One of the things that I have
Microphone.
Sorry, thank you. I'm concerned that there's no mention of Jefferson County in this airport stakeholders discussion. This airport is owned and operated by Jefferson County. And it is my opinion that we must involve them in the conversations, because Paul Anslow can say whatever he wants to say. And if the county commissioners and the county manager, I don't know exactly who all the people are over there, say, well, that was really nice of you to have those conversations, Paul. Now get back to work on making money for the airport. So for me, I feel like we have to have a piece in there. And I know this has already been approved, but I would like to have Jefferson County cited as one of the stakeholders, because it's important that whatever Paul does, that Jefferson County also buys into this, or it's for naught. So that's my only concern, is that we don't mention Jefferson County in this at all.
Okay. All right, anything further before we go to public comment? Okay. Public comment, you're up.
Lori Muir, I'm co-chair of the Superior Airport Noise Committee. I think I can answer a couple of these questions. As far as Jefferson County, I've read their regulations for the airport, all of them, several times. And Mr. Anslow has autonomy to do as he sees appropriate in most cases involving the airport. So I agree it would be good, you know, if they were also cited, but he does have a great deal of autonomy. And as far as this kind of consulting, you know, with all due respect, this is a very different kind of consulting than what most of us are used to. You know, it's not McKinsey kind of consulting or anything like that. This is more relationship consulting. We're dealing with several government entities here. As you said, the airport is owned and operated by Jefferson County. So that's a government entity we have to deal with. The FAA, the Air Traffic Control Tower, is also FAA, but they have their own culture and ethos that, you know, has to be dealt with. So it isn't the same kind of consulting that we're used to. And I think that you have to just accept that the outcomes are not as immediately or incrementally measurable as they are with most other kinds of consulting. Diane and I have both met with Jim and Jason to kind of express what our understanding is of the community's issues with the airport. As far as measuring noise, I think, Mark, you brought that up. We're not talking about trying to measure the decibel levels at this stage of the game. First of all, the FAA has set that bar extremely high. And based on extensive research I've done, almost no one beats that 65 decibel average LDN. So that's why we didn't even address that in terms of when we were looking at the easement, because trying to prove that is, expensive, and you're probably not going to win anyway, so why bother? That's why we went for the low-hanging fruit, which was B, C, and D, or B and C instead. So that's what we're talking about, is event noise and frequency of event noise, not measuring decibels, at least not at this point. Now, I know that the town of Louisville has a big problem with the jets, and that is more decibel related. But again, that's an extremely high bar, and the FAA, in their infinite wisdom, set it so high that, I don't know, almost nobody beats that. So again, there's no point in doing that. What we're trying to work on is the frequency of noise events. And that's why the touch and goes need to kind of be first as far as, what we're trying. The flight schools are responsible for the vast majority of the touch and goes. The touch and goes, I used to think it was only 60 to 70% of the operations, and operation is either a takeoff or a landing. But I now think it's probably more in the 70 to 80% range. And that's based on several days over the last week watching FlightAware obsessively, and seeing that the vast majority of planes taking off and landing from Rocky Mountain Metropolitan Airport are planes that are based there, primarily with the flight schools. Plus you have flight schools and student pilots from other localities also coming to do their touch and goes at Rocky Mountain Metropolitan Airport, because they have to do a certain percentage of their training at airports that have a tower, so they learn to communicate with the tower. Sorry.
You're getting close to 5. Do you mind maybe just wrapping up and giving us your opinion on...
Did anybody have a question that...
Well, we can't do question and answer
all right.
with public comment.
So we very much want Jim and Jason to do whatever they can to help us with this, because we're talking about people who speak a completely different language than we do. We don't know how to talk to them about this. I think they do have strong motivation to work with us, because my research shows that the Rock Creek easement is void. And, that would then give the people in Rock Creek the ability to sue. So that's a powerful motivation. And
okay, thanks. We're at 5 minutes. Additional public comment?
Can I?
Sure.
You're gonna tag in.
Thank you. Sorry. I know it's a late hour, so one thing I wanted to speak to with Laura, which you brought up, how we kind of got here.
I'm sorry, do you mind starting with your name? Just for the
sorry,
record?
Diane Marcella, sorry. How we kind of got here with getting the airport consultants is that there was a meeting last August up, was supposed to be here, but ended up being there. There was supposed to be working groups, round tables. There's about 120 people signed up. So I think it was determined that was just, how do we manage through that? And so it was like, okay, we don't have that expertise. How do we manage this? And it seemed like that was what the town determined to bring the consultants in. So I think it's, great that we have a lot of expertise in the community and what people are observing, or they're pilots, they have knowledge about the airport, et cetera. But if we're going back to that scope again, engaging everybody, it seems like we're kind of working backwards a little bit from, we're trying to, look at the data now, what can we fix? And there really are some kind of easy things. A part of going to to Kevin's point, and the other communities, frankly, Broomfield, Westminster, Arvada, they're not going to want to pay for this because some of the changes that I think are low-hanging fruit are going to direct more of the traffic to them. We have a primary and secondary runway, 30R and 30L. They're using the touch and goes for 30L. They're routing them over Superior. That's where you're getting that 99, 100%. They could be flying south off the primary runway, heading east. You're going to go over Commercial, you're going to go over Broomfield, et cetera. So, there's inter-county issues or cross-county issues that are going on here. So I think that's part of why you didn't get that kind of response. So anyway, and I do agree with what Trustee Ryan was saying about kind of going big if you're going to do this, because the airport could say, great, we want to be good neighbors. I've been hearing that for over a year. Our first meeting was March 1st, okay? Not many people attended. It was again up there, et cetera. So if we're going to be able to achieve anything and that there are metrics, what happens down the road, I think there is something to be said about that. Like, how do we see that the patterns have changed when there's safety measurements haven't met, that they are routing them on their main runway. So that, we can measure that the touch and goes are not just keep going over us all the time. They're going to grow the flight schools. They're going to put another 15 to 20 planes in the next month or two. They've already said that. So, this isn't going away. Anyway, I'm over my time. Thank you.
Thank you. Any additional public comment? Okay, let's wrap up our comments, and then I'd like to put this to a vote. Ken?
So I can start. First, I'm really glad that we have this in front of us. I'm glad we have the contract to take a look at. I'm glad that we've already been doing the work. I appreciate that you're here and that you're helping our community solve a problem. This is a real problem. It negatively affects and impacts the quality of life of, no doubt, hundreds of Superior residents. Overall, in reading the agreement, I think there's a positive general approach. I think that Lori hit the nail on the head. I don't think the problem is volume necessarily, it's frequency. And I think what I've heard tonight helps address that primary problem. So even though it might not be outlined the way I would have hoped in the contract, I am hearing that we're on the right path. This contract method gives us the ability to stop if we want to. So I have full faith in our town staff that through their monitoring of this contract, if we are hitting a dead end, if people don't want to work together, we will stop. And we're still going to have solid stewardship of taxpayer funds. I will say that this scope of work is very limited compared to what I would typically expect to see. But I want to put this in context for the rest of the board. This is $15,000. It's not a lot of money. The order of magnitude of risk that we're taking on, if we approve this, even though it might be missing A, B, C, and D of what we would have hoped to see, is not high. But the benefits are high. If we can actually move forward with what is proposed and planned, we can make a real noticeable difference in the quality of life of our residents. I hope that as everybody else goes through this, they take into account the level of risk compared to the level of benefit rather than looking purely at the contractual vehicle and what we would have optimally hoped to see. For this reason, I'll be voting for.
Thanks, Ken.
Can I ask a follow-up question to what you just said?
Yeah.
So I'm with you that this is $30,000 total. I recognize it's 15 to Superior. Do you think that we are getting what's in that contract for $30,000? because my concern is less around approving $15,000 for this and more that I have no idea what we're getting for that $15,000. I know we're not going to get everything in that contract, but I don't know what we are going to get.
And I think they've made that abundantly clear because they can't promise anything. So in my mind, based off what I've seen in the tasks, and even though they are very slim on details, I feel comfortable with our staff monitoring it and putting a stop down and bringing it back to us at any given point in time, saying, no, we're not getting what we would have hoped, that there's that check and balance. And in the optimal world, none of us are sitting here hoping this thing fails. I mean, we've got contractors here that want to do a good job. We have town staff that's going to do a good job monitoring. We all have intention of making sure this works. So because that stop is in place, I'm still comfortable moving forward.
Okay, who's next? Neil?
After you.
I want to make it clear that I take the health and safety of our residents seriously. I watched as this town and this board mobilized when Highlands filed their first drilling permit. Following that, we retained a lawyer to help the town develop a moratorium on oil and gas development and work on developing best practices. I don't recall ever having a potential cap discussion on those expenses or a specific list of deliverables. We are also the only community to pursue a NEPA lawsuit against the U.S. Fish and Wildlife for the opening of the Rocky Flats National Wildlife Refuge. We even had a resident here tonight from Jefferson County to thank us for that work. One could argue that the $15,000 contemplated here for Superior is potentially greater than what may be incurred in those two examples. But the point here is the need to start doing something about the unchecked growth of the airport. RMA has increased their flight volume dramatically over the past few years without ever starting a true collaborative discussion with any of the neighboring communities. I hate that we have no one from Jeffco or Broomfield or even the airport offering to pay for it, and I think we need a separate work effort to get more partners on that effort. However, that is not a reason to stop this now. I also want to be clear that I don't personally think that $30,000 is enough, but we have to get started somewhere. I just learned that we spent $30,000 on a slide today, so in the grand scheme of things, I'm not really too worried about this. I want to thank staff for finding ABC and working with them to whittle down the scope on our own direction. Honestly, I don't have a sunny weekend home, and I travel very little for work, so I'm here virtually every morning and evening, and I work from home today, and good Lord, there are a lot of flights coming over my house today because it was a nice sunny day. I know the sound is a major issue, and that's all the way where I live by Wildona. I recall how difficult it was to have simple conversations on driveways during the campaign on sunny afternoons. All that being said, I really do hope that the board will join me in moving this forward. Thanks.
Thanks, Neil. Mark?
So I just want to correct something that Neil just brought up. This board spent $300,000 on a slide, not $30,000.
That's right.
Wildflower Park, $300,000.
Artificial rock. Looks like real rock.
It is a great slide. It is one of the best. So tremendous slide. We heard a lot of great points today raised by the board. And you know, one of the things that I really love about this board is that we're fiscally conservative. We're very conscientious and careful with spending taxpayer dollars. We want to make sure that we're not wasting those dollars. We want to make sure that we're going to get something for our investments. But sometimes we have a tendency to micromanage, and we can get bogged down into the details and suffer from analysis paralysis, and that sometimes prevents us from actually getting things done. We continue meetings, we bring things back, and you know, here we're elected to represent. We're also elected to get things done and to actually execute on things. Sometimes you don't have all the information that you want. You know, most times you don't have all the information that you want. You can always gather more information. But sometimes you need to take a leap of faith. And, you know, one of the things that I took away from the discussion today was, you know, I thought originally, well, the problem is noise. And, you know, that's the concern that people are raising more often than not. There's a lot of noise. So why wouldn't we be monitoring noise, right? It just seems intuitive that if the problem is noise, you need to start by monitoring noise. But, I learned today from Jason's explanation that, well, one of the things that we can do is we can visualize the flight traffic before we start with this program at low cost, potentially very little cost because it's already publicly available, and then compare that to a visualization after the program is completed, and compare the flight paths. And, there, obviously, if you see the flight path moved, naturally the noise is going to change to be where the flight path is. I think that would be an extremely relevant data point for me and a means to, measuring success. If we can see that the flight path has changed after your work is performed, then we know that there's been some results that have been delivered. If we're hearing fewer neighborhood complaints, this is going to be the best $15,000 we've ever spent. This isn't a perfect contract, but at the end of the day, I echo what Ken said. The risk is low, but the reward is potentially really high. We've got buy-in from Louisville. I think that that's really important. Anytime that we can partner with neighboring municipalities, neighboring counties, the region, I think we're stronger collectively. I agree with the concerns that have been raised by Kevin and others that this isn't something that we should be funding, right? This is something that Jeffco should be taking care of, that the airport should be taking care of, that Broomfield should be buying into, but they're not, right? And there's a lot of things that, I think that other municipalities and other regional players should be doing, but they're not. But does that mean that we then shouldn't? Sometimes yes, but sometimes no. And under the circumstances, I think that this is a reasonable investment with a potential high reward that I'm willing to take a leap of faith. I trust Jason and Jim to do the job, use their expertise to deliver the results. I'm not an expert by any stretch of the imagination in any of this stuff. All I know is that we've got residents that are complaining about noise and complaining about volume, and if you can do something about that, and if it's only going to cost us $15,000, great. If at the end of the day, we've spent $15,000 and we don't have much of a solution, well, I think we've at least tried, and we've tried in a reasonable manner. I think doing nothing is unacceptable. And, I think under the circumstances, this is a reasonable thing for us to do, and I'm going to support it.
Okay, thanks, Mark. Sandy?
My father was a pilot. My father helped build 2 airports, and he was the chairman of one of the busiest airports in the country, Dulles International Airport. One of the things my father always said as a leader, he was a town councilman in the little town of Leesburg, Virginia, is that anytime you build an airport, it is responsibility of the airport to be a responsible neighbor and citizen. Sometimes airports need to be kicked in the butt to understand that and to learn the ways that they can be more effective neighbors. I agree this isn't the perfect contract. I agree that we asked for more detail and more specific tasks that would be accomplished, but this is what we are doing here is something that we as a community have never done before. I am comfortable that the amount of information that is provided in there gives me hope. We have 2 concerned citizens in the back of the room who are supportive and encouraged by the action that we are taking. We've been listening to this for over a year. I've been involved in meetings. My predecessor, Trustee Dozell, was very active in this. I strongly support moving forward on this. We owe it to our residents to do something. We'll never get this perfect, but let's make an effort to move forward.
Okay, thanks, Sandy. Kevin or Laura?
So a few things. Thanks for coming back, guys. It's $15K. I'm going to approve it. It's $15,000, right? Number 2, this $15,000 is spent for you, in my view, to be in the face for a couple things. To be in the face of the airport, to make sure they know that this community feels like every time a plane is flying over them, they're dropping little droplets of hate on this community. And let them know that and be in there. I'm not interested in PowerPoints. Thanks for the overview. I like you guys. I want you to be in there. That's what I want to pay for, and to create a structure that is sustainable, right? So there are members of this community that care a lot, that have impressed me tremendously with their knowledge, with their willing to roll up the sleeves and do the work. Use them, but also create an infrastructure that we could have some type of continued community engagement. Because if you come back with a continued consultant engagement, I will not approve that continued consultant engagement. I don't want a consultant that's going to run our subcommittee on airport noise mitigation. I think we could hopefully utilize maybe somebody from our staff can learn enough about what you guys could do, that they could run the quarterly meetings, ask for whatever data is going to be available, or a member of our community can run the meeting. But I'm supportive of this. I'm sorry that we sort of sent you a mixed message that we wanted to be cost conscious, and you de-scope this thing so much that it's just not really, and I don't mean this disrespectfully, but it's just not really that meaningful at SOW to me. But I do agree with what Ken said. You guys, just with your knowledge, with your passion, with the passion of the community, I do think we could, without spending very many dollars, have a big impact. I will be speaking at the Broomfield council meeting around my disappointment that they're not participating in this process. So I'm hopeful that it will not be news to the council when I speak to them about that. I'll also be writing a letter. But thank you.
Thanks, Laura.
So I'm really torn on this, guys. I mean, clearly it's going to pass whatever I do, but I have no desire to do nothing, as people have said. I really want to make sure the community knows that they are heard. But even if it's only $15,000, I just don't think it's fiscally responsible to spend money when we don't know where it's going. Everything that I've heard to me indicates that we're going to start this plan and we don't know how much of it we're going to get. We're going to get some bits and pieces of it, but we're probably not going to get it all done without getting more money. So since I have to decide, I'll vote for this, not because I like this plan, not because I think it's a good plan, but because I think it's worth $15,000 for the community to know that our board has heard them and that we want to do something. I don't think this contract is a good use of $15,000, but I do think it's worth $15,000 to do something. I think, Mark, you made a great point. You said it's a low risk with a potentially high reward. So Ken said that. Ken, let me give you full credit for that.
And I said, Mark said, Ken said that. Yeah.
Well, so several people have said that. I'll take the risk. I really hope we get the reward, but I'm doing this because I want the community to know that I hear their concerns, and I want to put some pressure on the airport. They should be good neighbors.
Okay, thanks. I appreciate our staff finding these guys who are experts in the field to help us navigate through a process that we clearly could not do as well. So appreciate our staff for doing that and for getting Louisville to buy in half of it. I mean, that was kind of unexpected and great to have them on board as well. And it's not a surprise the other communities are not pitching in on this. And I agree with all the other comments that have been made, so I'm going to support this as well. So with that, I'll
make a motion to approve Town of Superior Resolution Number R-14, Series 2019, resolution of the Board of Trustees of the Town of Superior approving services agreement with ABC X2 LLC for aviation consultant services.
Okay, motion by Mayor Pro Tem Lasis, second by Trustee Hammerly, and we'll need a roll call vote.
Lasis?
Yes.
Hammerly?
Yes.
Folsom?
Yes.
Skwadzinski?
Yes.
Shaw?
Yes.
Ryan?
Yes.
Wish?
Yes.
All right, motion passes unanimously. Thank you all. All right, I'd like to take a quick break before we go to a next agenda item. Is that acceptable?
Yep.
It's 10:30, it's the hour of. All right, so we're going to take a 10-minute.
Okay, so we need, we're getting ready to bid out the street improvement program for this year. So we need direction from the board on whether you want us to move forward with 88th Street improvements that's what the budget for this year was for 88th Street, or delay that and give us direction to, we're recommending Colton Road mill and overlay this year with delaying the 88th improvements until we know for sure what the Zaharias property is going to do. And that application should be resubmitted, we're thinking in March, and would get some sort of action by the board this year. So we'll know for next year if that's going to proceed or not.
So question about just what is anticipated with Colton are you looking at, I wasn't sure if it was Indiana to Rock Creek Parkway or the entire thing like Indiana to McCaslin or?
It's Indiana. I think there was a graphic in there, may not have gotten to your memo, but it was from Indiana to Rock Creek Parkway.
Okay.
And it'll be, that's fairly easy to do. It's like what we had done on McCaslin, where we have, the bare parts we'll patch, but it'll be basically a mill and overlay, and we'll probably do the same way where we would put all the traffic on one side, do the other side, and then switch back and forth. So that's, and we've kind of done the estimates and so forth on that. But 88th was the board's priority last year, and it does need to be done at some point, but we have some plans on the other side of the property that would affect it, and we didn't feel like doing a project. We can just reconstruct what's out there now, and then if a development comes in, we tear it up and so forth. So we thought it'd be better to make some decisions on that development and then come back to it later.
So there's sections of that stretch of Colton that have some, heaving where the ground is really shifted and you can really feel the bumps. So will a mill and overlay do anything to address that, or would that really require reconstruction of the road?
What we'll do first is do geotech investigations, where we actually take core samples every several hundred feet to test what the condition that the sub-base is, that the base is in, and that'll determine the sections where we need to reconstruct. And if we reconstruct the whole thing, it's about a $500,000 difference between mill and overlays. Again, when you do a mill and overlay, you have reflective tracking that's going to show up, a few years down the road.
So what's the length? I was surprised by that gap. That is $2.5 million for the patching, mill and overlay, full reconstruction, $3 million. I mean, obviously the full reconstruction is more expensive, but I was a bit surprised that it's only $500,000 more when it's the length of the road is going to be.
The reason is that we're assuming that there's major patching that has to be done. So there's a bunch of areas, as you know, that need patching. So
remind me, and so if it's a mill, what could you reasonably expect with a mill and overlay with major patching in terms of number of years?
Well, in the years that it's probably 15 years or so.
And if it was a full reconstruction, how many years?
20 to 25.
All right, so, I mean, I hate to, in that case, we'd have to do the geotech investigation. When you did the geotech investigation, would you come back to us with those two cost estimates? Because now they're a little finger in the wind. Would you come again and say, it's 2.2 versus 3, 2.7 versus 3, or is this it? We're giving you the.
I think what we would be doing is bid it as alternates.
Oh, okay, that makes sense.
And then you come back, and then we'll have the actual prices if you did reconstruct them the whole way versus mill and overlay. What we think would show up as.
And obviously, we'll figure it out. But I'm inclined, as you may guess, to think more about total cost and not the 2.5 million. So total cost over 25 years for 3 million to me is a no-brainer versus 2.5 for 15, but let's do the total adjustment. Really good memo. I have no further questions and fully support your.
Boy, give me 2 minutes on $3 million project.
Yeah, I mean, this road desperately needs some work, and you know, I think that if reconstruction is going to actually address the problems and it's going to last longer, and we're going to take care of the heaving, you know, let's not put a Band-Aid on this problem. Let's just solve it. And if we're going to solve something and it's going to last 20 to 25 years instead of putting a Band-Aid on it for 15, then let's just do it right. $500,000 is inconsequential, but I fully support just fixing Colton once and for all. One question that I have, in terms of the time difference for the construction, in terms of what the traffic adjustment that people have to deal with, like how long is the project going to take if we did a mill and overlay versus actual total reconstruction?
I don't think it's substantially, because we're still going to do a lot of patching, you know, major patching, and there'll be sections that will be have to be reconstructed. So I don't think it's going to be that substantially in terms of cost, in terms of time.
Can you talk about what the time estimate is just for the project from start to finish?
I think we're probably looking at 3 to 4 months.
We usually are wrapping up in October, 1st of October.
Okay.
Yeah, so we'd like to get it out and go to work in mid-June, so we have plenty of time to get it done before October, you know, mid-October, so we don't run into winter.
So does that mean that the bid process would finish and you'd have something back to us by early June or late May? Is that'd be the goal?
Yes, that's why we're coming, and we've got estimates done, we've got takeoffs. The real issue is whether we spend a lot of time trying to figure out whether mill and overlay versus reconstruct.
Can we make sure that we reach out to all the businesses in the Safeway supermarket there? Because obviously they're going to have to deal with a lot of detours.
Yeah, I mean
that this is coming, and that we're going to try to work with them as best as we can.
Right.
Just
The tricky part is how do you move traffic back and forth. So we need the contractor on board to help us through that process.
Right. So their first question was, are we good shifting from 88th Street to this? I mean, we had a lot of discussion around Colton, but maybe let's speak to that as well as we're answering. I'm in favor of doing Colton this year versus 88th. I think we need to figure out what's going to happen or not with Zaharias property before we do that. Laura.
So I had a question about this. First, want to agree with Kevin. I thought the memo was excellent, so great job with that. I did notice, though, that the McCaslin Rock Creek Parkway was originally scheduled for 2020, whereas Colton was 2021. So while I completely accept your recommendation, what was the rationale for not moving McCaslin?
Well, the rationale is that we looked at McCaslin. It's been under continual construction since 2014. Okay. And we felt maybe the commuters could deserve a break.
Okay.
Let's take a year off.
That's fair.
For tackling that one.
That sounds
was
good.
the rationale.
Okay. And then, Clint, to your point, I'm fully supportive of moving forward with this.
First, I want to talk about 88th. 88th's a disaster. I mean, it's fallen apart. The shoulders suck. There's no space for a bike. I mean, we got to draw a line in the sand. If Zaharias comes back to us and we don't like it and we're dickering over that for the next 9 months, we're going to have the same conversation a year from now about pushing off 88th, and then maybe we green light the Rock Creek or the McCaslin, Indiana roundabout or something and push off 88th again. I mean, I honestly think we have got to do something about that road. I mean, at the same time, the 1,000 trucks that are driving up and down it right now are probably tearing it up, so it's a good thing we haven't done anything. But I think as a board, we've got to be watching and make sure that, regardless of Zaharias, and we can't let the developer guide our street, management. I mean, it's definitely an input, but at some point, if, a year from now, I think we have to be digging up 88th without a doubt. But my question on Colton, and I forget, Alex, because you've explained it many times. If we wanted to add concrete refuges for crossing, can we do that with the full reconstruction? And I really think about some of the major intersections, about extending out the median so that we've got a concrete island for people who are crossing the street, either if it's, by Safeway or by Indiana. I'm driving through Broomfield, it seems like every one of their intersections seems to have a concrete refuge for people crossing. And I know that it's something we talked about on Colt Creek, and it's something I'd like us to think about, in broader context. And if we are going to rip and replace this road, we might have the opportunity potentially to improve the crossing.
So you're talking about at the intersections?
Yeah, or anywhere else. The intersections come first to mind because, there are lots of people crossing there. But I know that a lot of people cross Colton at Safeway where there is no crosswalk or anything. If we can add, a refuge there to make it easier to cross.
Like we did on Rock Creek Parkway where we put a, we had a median.
Right.
And we put a
just cut the median open.
That would make sense. At the intersections, you have an issue with how things are set up.
Oh, you're right.
With
You
trucks,
can't turn very well. Okay. Yeah, that's fair.
We truck, Broomfield has a little different, the way their intersections
They got a whole different problem. Yeah, I agree.
But we'll look at the Safeway to see if there's something we can put in that area.
My personal preference is that we would have stuck with 88th. That's absolutely the worst road within 50 miles. It is an absolutely untenable road. But if you want to do Colton, do Colton. The only comment I would make as someone who turns off that road every day, because I live in the summit at Rock Creek, I'd really like you look at the view when you come west on Colton and you turn onto Rock Creek Circle on the west side of Rock Creek Circle. The visibility to cross there, like if you're coming up from Safeway onto Rock Creek Circle, is terrible. I don't know if it's because the plants are growing up too big, if it's the barriers, but because traffic flies up that road, nobody goes 35. It is incredibly dangerous to turn left onto Rock Creek Circle.
Okay, we'll look at that.
And I'd like you to look into whether there's some way we can, if you're coming up from Safeway and turning onto Rock Creek there's accidents there more than I would like to admit, but the real problem is turning left onto Rock Creek Circle coming up from the Safeway. It's really dangerous.
Okay.
Thank you.
When this does come back to us for approval, Matt, would it be possible to also address the budget differences? Even if we go for full construction, it looks like there's going to be at least $250,000 that we had budgeted that's not being spent on this. Could you address what that would go to instead, or at least bring a menu of options?
Yeah, we may have some ideas on uses for that this year as well, or we will provide you information on how it's going to be used the future year. Yeah.
Appreciate it.
Okay, public comment? All right.
Good evening, Lisa Ritchie. I'm happy to hear y'all are okay with pushing this budget off for another year. I think that's a smart choice, particularly because we just don't know the exact configuration and we are still kind of figuring out what the traffic needs are and whether Promenade is going to connect, and all of that interplays into 88. So yes, I understand it is in need of some work, but do you feel that that's the wise choice? If you need additional budget, I don't know that everybody in the neighborhood is supportive of a traffic signal going in there at Coal Creek and Rock Creek Parkway. To me, I feel like that's money that is not needed to be spent for that amount of money. If you need an alternate source or an alternate project, I would argue that traffic calming kind of up and down Coal Creek Drive would be way more effective from that particular neighborhood to allow additional crossings at the trail connections at Akron, at Amherst, and potentially at Riverbend as well. So I think our money would be much better spent allocating the funds for the light to some traffic calming. It's my only thought. Thanks so much.
Thanks. All right, any additional discussion on this? All right. Thank you.
Thanks.
All right, with that, we're on to item number 7, executive session for the following purposes. Number 1, to hold a conference with the town's special counsel to receive legal advice on specific legal questions pursuant to CRS 24-64024B regarding oil and gas issues. And number 2, to hold a conference with town attorney to receive legal advice on specific legal questions pursuant to CRS 24-6204-4B regarding Land River litigation and zoning issues. Do have a motion to go into executive session? Motion by Mayor Pro Tem Laces, second by Trustee Shaw. All those in favor? Passes unanimous. All right, we're in executive session.